Or a pen.
I can help you out with the pen, not the glasses.
Yeah, it'll be right in front of us. Oh, on that one.
Okay, yeah. Okay, you should see it. So there's two ways to do it. You can either plug in your computer over there and then you're managing which one's yourself and then you're ready to go. Or I can sit over here and extend it for you and you can see it on the there. And then I can kind of just on
What a cute card.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us this evening at the workshop of the Hopkins School Board on December 20th, 2022.
You have a gavel?
I do. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a couple of board members who will be joining us a bit late, but we wanted to make sure that we had time to hear from everyone who's going to be getting us up to speed and updates on really important things happening in the district. So I would like to welcome our first, I'll turn it over to Dr. Miri Piri-Reed, who will invite those who will be giving us some information up to the board table.
Thank you, Chair Andreessen. So good evening to board members, community members who may be watching or listening in, and also colleagues in the audience. Thanks so much for being with us this evening. We were going to start with an update around school start times, but Dr. Lightfoot is probably ending a meeting that we were all in a few minutes ago, so we'll wait for him to pop on through, and I think we'll start with holistic school safety, which we are pairing with district-wide restorative culture, but we'll have our holistic school safety dynamic duo approach the board table here and give us our what we're hoping is a really great presentation. So obviously in Hopkins, school safety is a very, very important priority for us. We want to create the conditions in our classrooms and school and workspaces where students and adults feel not just physically safe, but psychologically safe, safe in terms of being able to express themselves socially, emotionally, behaviorally. And so we use the term holistic school safety to represent this idea that there are multiple facets to creating the conditions where students feel safe and schools and district office spaces are safe. So we do have a whole team of folks that meet on a very regular basis under the guidance of Chris Carr, our safety consultant, also Hopkins parent, and Brian Stanley, our Assistant Director for Special Services. There are some other folks on the team, and they'll help us understand who's on the team and what we do. And so I'll turn it over to the two of you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Superintendent. And thank you for having us and allowing us some time to talk about something that's clearly very important to all of us. My name is Chris Carr. My pronouns are he, him, and I am a security consultant with Diacon Consulting. And about a year ago, almost to the date, I realized, the Holistic Safety Committee came together as kind of a more formalized structure to initiate dialogue and action related to safety and security for Hopkins schools. Now, it's not a new conversation, but it is a conversation that we wanted to bring a different level of urgency and purpose to. And often we look at these things through very binary lenses. And when we do so, especially around safety and security, it puts us in a really challenging place ideologically, and sometimes that can lead us into a place of inaction or stagnation. And safety and security, when it comes down to it, in our schools, the people who pay the price for inaction are the people who are in that space every day, students, faculty, and staff. And so our approach in assessing holistically and looking at things through the lens of what does it mean to prevent harm, whatever that harm may look like when we think about it physically, psychologically, culturally, socially, and emotionally. Our goal is to be preventative of harm, of violence, and of destruction toward that space and that community that we value so much. And as we evaluate and assess our assets and vulnerabilities, as well as provide solutions for, and some of which we are going to be talking about that have already been activated, and some things that we are in the process of putting strategy and some real planning and structure around, you're going to get a chance to hear about some of that tonight. Next slide, please. So the highlights, some of the things you're going to hear from Brian and I are about Prepare. Prepare is a curriculum that Brian's going to be talking about, in particular around emotional, psychological trauma and resiliency and prevention of the deepening of harm for people involved with incident management. Character Strong curriculum, which is focusing on social emotional learning. Risk and threat assessments, what are we currently doing and what are we going to be doing in terms of that process. We're going to be talking about a report, we call it the Rosen report, and we'll get into some details on the name and the reasoning and the value of it. Some people within our the board currently, I know, had some exposure to this security risk assessment that was done district-wide about 4 years ago. What does it mean for us to be looking at and utilizing tools like a guide for developing high-quality school emergency operations plans and teams, and then reviewing and updating our existing Hopkins District crisis management plans, and then some communication planning. That's a lot, obviously, in a very short period of time, so we want to be efficient so people have a chance for some questions and answers. Next slide, please, and I'll give it to Brian.
Sure. Good evening, Brian Stanley, Assistant Director of Special Services. About a year ago, we started talking about a framework or a structure that we could put in place, both to prevent, respond, and recover from a variety of different type of crisis situations, anything stemming from an elementary student falling on the playground and injuring themselves to circumstances that we've encountered in this district associated with if it's physical altercations or deaths of students. And what we were really, with the mental health crises that we were experiencing, what we really wanted to spend time about is how do we bring into our incident command system the framework of mental health and well-being. And Prepare does that. It's obviously an acronym, and you can see it there. So we were fortunate to secure the necessary funding, and 40 of us, administrators, principals, social workers, counselors, went through a 2-day workshop with Prepare trainers. And Prepare is done by the National Association of School Psychologists. So kind of the idea is that crisis response in schools is very unique, and it has to be trained in a way to help educators be able to respond to those crises. And educators are the ones who are driving the framework, and it's continuously evolving. They're now on their third kind of modality of Prepare. So from this, it allows us then to think through our incident command system, which obviously is done kind of outside of schools that we've incorporated into schools, and how can we put the school twist on it with a specific focus and emphasis on student well-being, both as well as, you know, promoting resiliency, coping skills, but also in the response and recovery. How do we make sure our response is appropriate so we don't do additional harm, either because we're under responding, or even if we over respond, we can also do potential harm psychologically to students and staff members as well. Go ahead, Elise. In addition, one of the parts of holistic school culture is school climate. And we know when students feel engaged, they feel that they could show up and be their authentic selves and are interconnected with one another. That promotes the type of culture that we want, where we have care and concern and empathy for one another. So we were fortunate to create a partnership with Character Strong through Dr. Clay Cook, who initially was at the University of Minnesota, and now he's the kind of development director for Character Strong. Character Strong, you know, it's, I think initially people think it's an SEL curriculum, but really what Character Strong is currently doing, and the pathway that they have, is really going to be a more of an MTSS, multi-tiered system support system, where they're actually developing tier 2 and even tier 3 interventions that can be tied and support schools as they promote SEL. But Character Strong right now is happening at both of our junior highs and high school. It happens on a weekly basis, and there's vertical alignment, so the students do not have the same lessons in sixth grade as they do in seventh. It continues to build developmentally over the course of the time that they spend with us here in Hopkins as well. And it's really a kind of the idea is how do we get high impact and low burden on our teachers as well. So it follows a very scripted process, but it addresses really 21st century skills or those graduate traits that we have as part of our 2031 vision. So we just started that this year, the implementation, and we just engaged Dr. Clay Cook about the potential of moving this. They also have a curriculum, SEL, for K through 5 called Purposeful People, so we'd have vertical alignment that way as well as engaging Dr. Cook around potentially Hopkins piloting their Tier 2 as well. My last part here, risk and threat assessments. A couple years ago, probably more than 2 years now, probably we're on our 4th year, we're seeing a increase in suicide ideations, risks around self-harm, and all of our social workers and counselors obviously have specific training, but we wanted to have some consistency so we can speak the same language. So we adopted the Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. A very easy assessment. It was designed for, you don't even necessarily need to be a clinician. Law enforcement uses it. Teachers can use it. In our district, primarily most risk assessments are done by our social workers or counselors, but really what it's designed to do is to be a very short, brief, direct way of assessing a student's suicide ideation as far as both the level of ideation and the potential of their follow-through, and then it also helps and guides the social workers and counselors on next action steps. And usually almost in all these circumstances, if I was to do a risk assessment on a student, I'm also consulting with one of my colleagues to help me and just think through so I have an extra set of eyes and ears on that. And then on the other side of threat assessment has to do with the potential of someone following through with a threat they make, obviously harm to others. This one is a little bit more complex. We use the Secret Service Enhancing School Safety threat assessment. It has 13 different themes, both as far as proactive factors as well as concerns and themes that you may see. And through that process, you can determine the potential of a student's level of threat. In these cases, though, we for sure want to take a multidisciplinary approach. We have to have administration involved in there, of course, but I'll just give one quick example. Last year, we had a significant threat where we actually engaged the Hopkins Police Department and involved an investigative officer, and through that we are able to provide a high degree of support both to the family and the students in that situation. And actually we were able to determine that that student was actually very vulnerable in a certain situation too. So because of that multidisciplinary approach versus a disciplinary approach where we just see a threat and then respond and maybe suspend a student, we were actually able to uncover a set of situations that needed a response more than just what the school itself could do, both for the family as well as, or for the parent as well as the student. So anytime we talk about the threat assessment, what we're trying to do is make sure that an old model of disciplinary reaction, I mean, that's still a component of it, but more importantly, it's about what are the preventions and interventions and supports that we can offer through what we find in our investigative process.
So next, we're going to have some conversation around the Rosen report, as we kind of informally call it. About 4 years ago, in the wake of the Stoneman Douglas High School shooting in Parkland, Florida, the district engaged in some conversations around assessing where were our assets and vulnerabilities and risk levels associated with acts of violence, but in a more general sense, what were the vulnerabilities and likely threats that we might experience. We brought in Rosen Security Consulting to provide that district-wide assessment. And as we have kind of come back into in-person space and encountered all of the unique facets and sometimes complications that we are now seeing as we have moved back into in-person learning environments. It was in time for us to go back in and take a really intentional look at what was the status of the action items and recommendations associated with the report as it was given. So as we considered what were the most likely safety and security hazards and threats that were provided at that particular time, a couple of the elements that were provided. Now, this is just in terms of profile-wise as an academic institution and a lot of other factors brought into it. That when it was originally done to 2022, we found that our internal review confirmed that those elements were still the case. In particular, the highest levels of concern or risk were associated with active assailant and or assault, mutually accessed assault, fights, that type of conflict as well, which are some of the things, unfortunately, that we've experienced over the last couple of years. We also took a look at what the assets, vulnerabilities, and recommendations were coming out of that. And part of our process of being able to evaluate each of those assessments as they were done, school by school, was myself and John Wetter from the district made appointments and visited each school. The leadership sat down with the principal and some of the associate principals for each school and walked through what those recommendations, assets, and vulnerabilities were, and found that most of them, if not all of the recommendations, were still valid and still relevant to the culture and environment that the leadership identified for their space. Also had some time to meet with Buildings and Grounds and talk about what were some of the initiatives that had been carried forward over the last couple of years, and then what were some things that were currently on our plate. We found that most of the things that we were looking at and were identified were, as I said, very relevant, but also many of those things had yet to be engaged in part, whether it came to budgetary reasons, because of we were distance learning, et cetera. They did not meet that threshold at that particular point of urgency. It's given us a good opportunity, though, to be able to look at and say, now we have a real concrete and still relevant assessment and plan and strategy that we can build off of. And another element that is included within it was projected and aggregated budget process placeholders and recommendations. As we continue to look at that and district-wide initiatives versus site-specific and being able to kind of put those into different categories and identify in particular what are the elements within the action items and recommendations that would accomplish prevention-based, are more about deterring a particular threat or hazard or responding to it. By being able to organize them that way, we're able to be really intentional in having good balance and not just lean really heavy into response or just into prevention, but have a very, as we said, holistic perspective on it. But make no mistake, we are also taking a very assertive posture when it comes to urgency, because we recognize that this is too important and too relevant to the students, faculty, and staff, as voiced by conversations with students, with faculty and staff, that we really are taking that to heart and letting that guide our work. Next slide, please. So the immediate impact, as we can consider what are some things that have come up out of that and what is the work that's happened. The walkthroughs, interviews identified new vulnerabilities and recommendations for the process and procedure. Some of our critical response plans, incident management, et cetera. Some of the new processes that the schools are going through in terms of how students and people move in and out of the schools. Where are the primary access points? And where are access points that are maybe not as active and utilized? Where is space changed in terms of playground usage and things like that, where that was not how they were initially back in 2018 and 2019? And being able to also identify what are some opportunities for staff training and development for that deterrence and response, because the resources available today compared to what were available back then are even greater and more effective and identified as being very positive. And as we're planning and establishing some coordination with the community and public safety for large-scale events, one of the examples I give is, as we know, this fall, a lot of schools experienced and encountered larger altercations taking place, even to the point of firearms at some of the high school football games around the metro area. We really recognized that and put together a very structured and comprehensive plan in partnership with Minnetonka Police Department, the athletic department, and additional faculty and staff and volunteers that were able to maintain not just an effective response plan if something were to happen, but to put into position an environment that was both welcoming, was fun, had maintained the intention of the event, and at the same time created a preventative and deterrent security posture as well. And we found that to be effective and a good model for us to use going forward. And next slide, please. So as we move into our next steps, right now we are working on establishing what are some of the facilities and finance needs, and they're working collaboratively to identify what are some immediately available resources, as well as being able to invest in those most urgent needs, as well as projecting into the future what are some of those funding sources that might be accessed in terms of grants on a local, state, and federal level, as well as operational budget planning, as well as being able to take some recommendations around staffing models that support and maintain resiliency, the safety and security mindset that is also being done through the lens of relationship. Next slide, please. So as we are, and Brian and I can kind of share in this one, looking at our planning process, what does it mean for us to have an effective school emergency management planning and development? We're really looking at checking most boxes and being intentional and thoughtful in that process. To be able to form a collaborative planning team, we have done that. That team is operational and functional. We have done the assessment work of understanding our current cultures and situation, and we are in the process and have already worked on some goals and met some of our objectives even in the very short period of time we have been gathering for about a year. Plan development that we are continuing to maintain, and as well as preparing for that next step and building up systems that are resilient, that are standardized and can withstand and be fluid enough to adapt to our culture and community within Hopkins schools. And I think that's what we have. So with that, we'd open it up for questions.
Great, thank you so much for presenting all this information. I realize that it was very high level in order to get through all of it. So I welcome any board members who have questions for Chris and Brian.
I have a quick question. Oh, hold on.
I have a quick question. I'm curious, I saw on the behavioral threat assessment and management piece that you are involving the technology department. I'm just curious from like monitoring laptops, information on the Google Drives, there's a lot of tools available. Is that something that we've invested in? Is it something that is on our radar?
Yeah, currently what happens in that, and I should have elaborated on that, because that is another example how the multidisciplinary, if we do have a threat that, let's say, involves a student potentially bringing a gun to school in particular, immediately I'm notified of that set of situation, and then we use our technology department, and they respond very quickly where their Google searches, as well as their Google Drive is searched, and we get a report, and then we can go through that to see if there's any red flags in that as well.
So more of a reactive approach though versus a proactive monitoring of like potential flagged words or, anything like that?
Do we want to bring John Wetter up here real quick?
If we can take it offline. I know.
No,
No,
there
I
is,
think
and
this
it
question is
important.
important. John, you want to quick come up and just provide a 60-second response?
Sorry, John.
We'll get to see if John was listening back there.
Yeah, were you listening, John, or do you need me to repeat the question? Okay.
Yeah, when we look at doing threat assessment information, what information is available, I think there's an important balance to also find there with student privacy and around kind of normalizing surveillance as well. And so we currently don't do those pieces where we're actively investigating into Google Drive or into search histories unless there's a reason to.
Okay.
But we do have the tools in place that help us catch the concerning behaviors if they're searching for information that
Yep.
would present concerns, then we have an ability to catch that, correct?
Correct. If a student starts to search for some of these terms that Brian has talked about, then we do see that information, yes.
I would say along the lines of technology too, some of the conversations and what we've looked at as well is what options are there in terms of the establishment of elements like a reporting system or notification system that really what it does, it can be very empowering to a student body, to the faculty and staff to be able to contribute information in. Some of it might be anonymous or some of it might be identifiable, but really to give people an opportunity to say something in a method and threshold that's efficient and can organize information effectively too.
Okay.
Chair Andreessen.
Yes.
I'm one of the few that was around here during the development of the Rosen report, or the delivery of it. And I can't recall exactly what the budgetary impact would be if all their recommendations were implemented. Can you refresh my memory on that?
Yeah, and I would say it with the caveat that a lot of that was kind of the culmination of a lot of different projects that wouldn't necessarily be intended to be implemented in a one-shot cost. I believe the total, in terms of the recommendation, was somewhere just on, it was between $9 and $10 million worth of capital projects that would be looked at, and I would encourage, as we'd be looking at it over a 5-year to 10-year period of development. And then I believe that because there isn't currently within the operational budget structure for the district, something dedicated as safety and security
Right.
as a line item, I think there was about $1 million operational budget cost based on the recommendations coming out of that. Again, with the caveat that it's that would be the total cost, not as a one-shot piece, but as an implemented incremental cost and development over time.
1 million operating cost annually, right?
Yes, that would be the operating cost piece.
Okay.
And that was mostly dedicated to elements such as staff and some additional ongoing cost technology pieces that were not capital expense, mostly staff and payroll, that type of stuff.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. I just wanted to clarify a few things. I think that I just want to make sure that for our listening public that we're clear about, I think the comment that you made about firearms being brought to football games, I think that was a Metro incident and not necessarily specific to Hopkins.
Yeah, if I didn't clarify that, I apologize. Yes, there were events that took place around the metro,
Right,
such as that event that took place.
Being proactive.
Correct.
In
Yeah,
our
utilizing
response.
relationships and partnering with some of the schools that did impact or did affect, having some conversations with them so that we could put systems in place that were, frankly, that had been taken advantage of by parties that had allowed those events to take place. We were able to create resiliencies that would deter if there were people with that intention.
Great, thanks. I just wanted to clarify that. And also, one of the pieces that I find really effective is the focus on social emotional learning, and just a reminder to our community that it wasn't so long ago where we had some big tragic events happen in our schools that were based largely on personal safety. that there were some students who lost their lives. And I think that focusing on where we see the largest vulnerabilities in our community is really important. And so I'm happy to see these layers of support that have been implemented that are specific to our students, our families, and our community. So I appreciate that focus.
Chair Andreessen,
Yes.
I do have another question that just occurred to me. Brian, I'm asking you, you talk about self-harm and possible behavioral harm to other individuals. Do we measure that at all within the district? Do we have I'm just trying to figure out how frequent that is right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's increased with frequency. I mean, I think I could say probably on a daily basis, there's probably a social worker or counselor who's at least following up on that situation. Now, are we notified at the district level? Not necessarily.
Yeah.
On that. Threat assessments, though, there is a process where that goes through, and there is a notification system through Google. I mean, I can tell you just the last 2 days, each day I've been involved in a threat assessment. So,
And you say you're seeing an increase in those incidents over the last 2 years?
yes. I think what we are seeing in our society around violence and mental health, we're a microcosm of that in our schools as well.
Sorry to hear that. All right.
And I would say that, Chair Anderson, what you had commented on, the tragic deaths, I was front and center in those deaths at West Junior High, and kind of my ultimatum in my head was never again, please. And the prepare, as well as the SEL focus, really has come out of those tragedies, that we all saw it and said we need proactive. And even the football games, the fact that we met as an incident command team, I think twice that week leading up to the homecoming game, shows the kind of work that we're talking about as prepare and prevent, prepare and prevent. How do we do that? Both through a security purpose, and a lot of times we talk about school security, it has that kind of old tradition. What we're talking about is school safety, and that holistic approach really comes through. And the model that we're using at the district is what we want to have our schools and incorporate. So that last slide that you saw is when we went through the planning and implementation, the goals and objectives. We want each and every individual site to go through the same process.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Appreciate your work.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I do just, for anybody who might be watching, I do want to thank the other members of the district holistic school safety team, and also the members of all of our site-based holistic safety teams. There's a lot of very caring, very knowledgeable individuals who are participating in this process to prevent, prepare, mitigate, respond in ways that put students at the center of the work. So thanks to everyone for their efforts.
Now do we want to move on to restorative practices? So we'll go to the third item on our workshop agenda to pair with our holistic school safety conversation, a restorative practices update.
Thank you, Chair Andreessen. So as our presenters are coming forward, I'll just share that, for probably longer than any of us can remember, schools have been places where there's a culture of adults being fairly authoritarian, adults telling kids what to do, behavioral consequences being punitive, sometimes without explicit instruction to students around what behaviors that are expected look like and sound like. And in lots of places across our country, the exclusionary practices, kicking kids out of class, suspending students from school, have contributed greatly to the school-to-prison pipeline. So in Hopkins, we truly dare to do things differently, and We want to create a culture that is not focused on adult and student compliance, but is focused on engagement and ensuring that students and adults have agency, and ensuring that our classroom and school spaces are restorative, not punitive. So there's a lot of work and intentionality that goes into creating school-wide and district-wide restorative culture. And so I'm very pleased to have this team at the table. We have our district-wide restorative culture specialist, Maria Barry-Boyne. Bearboyne, okay. And then our other presenters, Suzanne, Elizabeth, and Angela, and we thank you for your time this evening.
Thank you. Good evening, Superintendent Mary Perry Reed and board members. Thank you for letting us be here this evening. Before we begin, we'd like to ask a clarifying question that will help us facilitate this presentation and pursue future work with you. By indicating with a thumbs up, thumbs sideways, or thumbs down, have you ever taken part in a restorative justice or restorative practice circle, chat, or training? Yes, maybe, no. Wonderful. We're walking our talk. That's wonderful to see. Thank you. My name's Maria Bearboyne, and I'm the Restorative Culture Coordinator for the district. Tonight I come with some of my colleagues who are on our Restorative Culture district-wide team. They are also on our non-exclusionary discipline team.
I'm Angela Wilcox at North Junior High.
Elizabeth Johnson, I'm at Gatewood Elementary.
And I'm Suzanne Packenham at Meadowbrook Elementary.
I should have done that. I apologize.
So we'd like to begin with a practice that is born out of restorative culture, which is hearing every voice at the table. So our question for you is, what keywords would you want others to use when speaking of Hopkins Public Schools? So we'll give you a couple seconds to think. Then we're just going to go around and share 1 to 3 words that you hope others would use when they describe our district. Does anyone want to go first? Boss?
Welcoming, warm, and brilliant.
And we'll proceed to the left. Whenever we're in circle, we go to the left.
I would agree with Chair Andreessen, and I would say definitely warm and welcoming and inclusive. That was one of the things that I felt when I first walked into Alice Smith when I brought my kids there.
I would say similar, welcoming, inclusive, and everybody has a seat at the table, so same thing.
I would say excellent and inclusive.
I would say high support and high expectations.
Academic rigor is high, and social, emotional, cultural, climate support. It's more than one. I know, sorry.
I would say inspiring and world-class education.
Culturally competent, lifelong learners.
I would say inclusive and also joyful.
I would say loving, innovative, and fair.
Excellence and caring.
I would say academically challenging, personalized, and nurturing.
Thank you. Restorative practices support the overarching goal of strengthening school climate and community by developing a restorative mindset in the adults first, building community for all school members, and responding to harm by exploring our own relationship to harm. In a restorative school, we foster relationships with the same emphasis and support that we pursue academic skills. Central to restorative practices are the beliefs that all people are worthy and relational, and we must build, maintain, and repair relationships. In the book Circle Forward, Building a Restorative School Community by Kay Pranis and Carolyn Boyes-Watson, there are 7 core assumptions that you see here. In effort to raise your voices and engage your awareness, Dr. Mary Perry Reed, will you please read the first one, and then could we pass to the left and read each of the 7 assumptions?
The true self in everyone is good, wise, and powerful.
The world is profoundly interconnected.
All human beings have a deep desire to be in a good relationship.
All human beings have gifts, and everyone is needed for what they bring.
Everything we need to make positive change is already here.
Human beings are, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
It's all you. Human beings are holistic.
We need practices to build habits of living from the core self.
Thank you. The Minnesota Department of Human Rights created a report. The data that you see here shows that schools across the state, including Hopkins schools, were suspending and expelling Black students 8 times more than white students. Suspending and expelling Indigenous students 10 times more than white students. And suspending and expelling students with disabilities 2 times more than students without disabilities. Hopkins Public Schools entered into an agreement with MDHR during the 2017-2018 school year to address these disparities through the implementation of restorative culture practices district-wide.
This work requires us to shift our thinking, our mindsets, and our school culture in 4 significant ways. We are trying to move from schools that lack belonging and are siloed, where power funnels down from administrators to teachers to staff to students, with parents as outsiders. Shifting to schools where belonging and collaboration are at the center, where there is shared power between all members, and we are centered on students and families. The second shift, efforts to suppress misbehavior and dominate students based on the belief that conflict and misbehavior are signs of human failure. Shifting to a culture that recognizes misbehavior as an opportunity to engage students as citizens and decision makers, allowing them to develop accountability in the context of a relationship among equals. The third shift is moving from an authority-driven disciplinary action that focuses on retributive and carcerative punishment to restorative practices that bring everyone together to reflect on self in relation to others. And finally, a culture of punishment and exclusion that isolates and devalues individuals and is used to control them, to a culture where dialogue is engaged in that leads to understanding and empowerment to take responsibility because of relationships and self-worth.
Restorative Culture and Vision 2031. During the 2021-22 school year, the HILT RP subgroup and the Hopkins Restorative Culture Steering Committees developed this diagram that you see. This diagram explains why we must pursue restorative culture in our district, that's in red, how we will do this in both of the blue sections, and what we need to successfully implement and exist within a restorative culture. Their hope was that we would have all of this completed by June of 2023. High ideals. We can assure you that we are closer to realizing this, and we are developing each of the elements identified in their how and their why. We're constantly looking back at the work that's been done before we came to the table to make sure that we continue the work that our predecessors started.
All right, this slide, we want to kind of talk about what our plan is and what is going on at schools right now. We are currently working across the district to develop a shared language and communication between sites, and consequently a vision that identifies what is important to all of us and allows each of our schools the autonomy to create their own systems to support their restorative culture community. These individual communities connect and align under our Hopkins Vision 2031.
So what are some of the things that we can hang our hat on? So far this school year, we have all of our sites include restorative culture in their learning and teaching goals. We have a district-wide shared drive of resources that can be used at each site for implementation and practices. We have restorative culture as a central component of our Hopkins instructional leadership teams, but also our building instructional leadership teams. We have district-wide restorative culture team meetings that happen bi-weekly, where we go and are hosted at different sites, and we share the work that's being done at our site. We learn from each other and we collaborate. We've been working on a problem of practice as well, where we do sort of in-house professional development. And then we also have the implementation of RC staff development at each site. We have trained circle keepers at every site in the district.
Top challenges in fostering restorative culture. We know that there are inconsistencies in the way that data is being recorded and collected. This is something that's actually become center to our work just recently. This is most important, although it's important in a multitude of ways, but when we're relating to non-exclusionary discipline, we have to make sure that we are doing something that's consistent throughout the district, and that we are truly collecting the numbers.
Funding must be consistent and sustainable.
Restorative culture specialist, and we really need all people who have the word restorative in their titles to hold the 7 core assumptions that Maria presented in the beginning as part of their North Star. Like, we need fidelity within people when we're going to use the term restorative in Hopkins, that we all kind of mean the same thing. We also still have criminalizing language throughout our policies, procedures, and safety plans in our schools.
And finally, and building off of that, we know that we need leadership. If this work is going to happen with fidelity and be implemented at all levels in the leadership, we need leaders who have an in-depth knowledge of restorative culture, restorative mindsets, and impulses across all of our sites, which means we need to center restorative culture in our planning and our funding.
So we would like to leave you with some words from Dr. Cornell West, our professor of philosophy, politics, literature, and music. And that's just never forget that justice is what love looks like in public.
Thank you. Are there questions?
Thank you for that presentation. It was really informative. Are there any questions from my board colleagues?
Chair Andreessen?
Yes.
I have a couple of questions. One is, I was going to ask if there are any improvements in data points, like we started off with some Minnesota Department of Human Rights, some fairly alarming ones that clearly require change on our part. Is there any updated info from then, either from a source like that or even internally, that points to success that we're having?
It's the point that we made about consistency and how we're recording things currently is something, it's like we've been pulling the thread. And so we did look at data points, but because we have such inconsistencies and we know we have inconsistencies in how things are being recorded and what is being recorded, we don't have, I don't think, the data to support that the work that we are doing is working right now.
So maybe the best thing to say is we're aware of it. And just in preparing to speak with you and share with you, this took me down a deep, difficult path. And so we're in contact now with our data, what do we call Dr. Abby?
With our Dr. Abby.
Dr. Abby,
Yeah.
data
Our data
scientist?
scientist, yes.
Yeah, and so we'll be working with her. I'm meeting with her tomorrow so that I can take and start to do the work during the winter break to really focus on this, come up with what my questions are, and then she and I will work together to start to pull things, and then we will bring the district administration and those people who are recording exclusionary and non-exclusionary discipline practices. We'll bring them to the table so that we're making sure that everybody who's entering is using the same and proper items that they're entering.
I think something else that I think is useful, and I can give an example, at least from my personal experiences, we use Infinite Campus as our data recording system. When you go into Infinite Campus, and if I process with a student and I do something restorative, that can be a myriad of different things. The only choice that I have in Infinite Campus is restorative. And that could mean we had a circle, that could mean so many different things. And so it is a process truly of Hopkins is really trying to do something different, and all of the systems that we need to support that work, it doesn't exist quite yet. So we're just learning that as we're going to look like, well, how do I know how do I tell you that Gatewood has had, X number of restorative circles? Well, we don't really have a solid system for recording that yet. So I know it's not a great answer, but it is like we're finding all these pieces of things that we didn't know we needed until now we know we need them, so.
And as we've been meeting as restorative specialists between buildings, and this is the first year that we've had anything like that. I've been doing this work for a few years, and I'm so excited to have colleagues this year. And as we share our ANIC data, as we're talking about, I was able to stop 2 kids from fighting because I had a relationship with one of them, and I did this, and they came with me, and that fight never happened, and that suspension never happened. That's not going to show up in our numbers because nothing's been recorded because no suspension happened. But we know that as we build relationships with kids, and they have trusted relationships with adults, and they care about what somebody thinks of them, we can intervene before things get to the point of exclusionary discipline. And so we hope that we can find ways to capture those stories and capture that kind of data as well.
We would be happy to share some information with the board. We do have data. I did want to go back and just make sure the board understands that most of these districts that were studied by the Minnesota Department of Human Rights were engaging in exclusionary practices that were disproportionate according to their total student populations. So we were not the only ones. It's a statewide and nationwide challenge. And we are still disproportionately suspending our students of color. However, we have made significant progress in the types of proactive and relationship-based restorative practices that we're exercising at all of our schools, and we're getting very savvy with how we use data and how we leverage our data specialists to capture what is being done site by site. To, I think, underscore what the team is saying, we're in sort of this labbing phase, and so what we need to work on is identifying the next and best practices and share across sites so that we can increase our consistency and also calibrate so that there isn't, this huge variation in discernment from site to site. So there's a lot of work that we still have to do, but we've made tremendous gains also.
To add to that, so you'll see on this slide the reference to the District Restorative Culture Project Plan. So we have many project plans going throughout the district. In this one, we're using the lab operating system to address and work with developing a restorative culture mindset, to develop restorative culture community, to develop repair of harm. And all of these things will keep us so that we've got like an overarching understanding and work within the district, but that's also autonomous, and so it meets the needs of each site.
Chair Andreessen.
Yes.
What's the status of our settlement agreement with the Department of Human Rights? Do you know? Do they come in on a regular basis and audit us, see if we're making progress, or what's the status?
We currently are working with the Minnesota Department of Education, so, and working with, and we are the team that is the non-exclusionary discipline grant recipient team. And so
Okay.
we work with them to meet the requirements that were set by the Minnesota Department of Human Rights. So
Is there a definite point at which we can say we're concluded, we're done with it?
That's
Or is this going to be ongoing for the next 20 years?
It's a great question. I don't have an answer, but I will ask the Department of Education the next time we meet.
Okay.
I know that they have a tiered approach to working with the districts, with the, and we are in the highest tier, so we've done some of the best work. So we're working with a group of other districts and schools and charters who have also done, substantial work towards that. We've been recognized in that way.
All right. Well, I have to say that one of the biggest issues I remember that we identified when we got hit with that lawsuit was that, or it wasn't a lawsuit, it was a letter of reprimand or something, was that our data integrity was horrible. Every school recorded an incident in a different way. There was no way to see any consistency. And that was, what, 6 years ago? Why has it taken so long to get data consistent at all these sites? I just am really surprised that it's taken this long to get us to the point we're at. Is there?
Are you talking about in Hopkins? Or
Yeah.
Well, I think it's very complicated. So first of all, we have to navigate within the system we have, which is Infinite Campus. And there, I don't know much. Well, we probably need to call Mr. Wetter back to the table here. I don't know how much flexibility we have with telling Infinite Campus what kinds of codes we would like to use and how nuanced they can be.
Yeah,
and then
probably
there's
none.
the site-to-site training. And there are multiple individuals at each site who are constantly interacting with students all the time. And so it's, I don't know, I would liken it perhaps to teacher observation and evaluation, and maybe in 100 or 200 years, we've been working on how to have inter-rater reliability and consistency around how we interpret the quality of teacher instruction and how we give consistent feedback to teachers, right, within a school, within a district, within a state, within a country. So we're working on it.
Can I add one more thing
And
to
can
that?
you also just bring it down to 4 years? Because we did have 2 years of COVID where
I
we
was
didn't
gonna
have time.
say-
True.
I was going to say, I think really the biggest piece of that answer is the disruption of COVID and some pretty significant leadership changes in buildings across the district, which means that any work that was started then got dramatically disrupted.
Yeah.
And then with COVID, it's just been a very slow restart into building systems across buildings with, yeah.
Well, there will always be personnel changes. So, I mean, that's something that's a fact of life. I'm just looking forward to the day we get out of the penalty box with the Department of Human Rights. It just sticks in my craw after all the work that we've done all these years, that we aren't any further ahead, apparently, than we are today. And I'm just really disappointed, because I know the commitment that I have and our board has and our staff has to consistency and a process, a restorative process for students. But it's just, it's taken so long.
If I might say, Director Adams, we're not in the penalty box. We are in a space where the way we are engaging in this practice is a model for other districts. We are more progressive than most other districts, and we have received the recognition for being in that space. So it's not a penalty box. It's more.
Well, we were one of 43 districts that were selected for implementing discriminatory practices. And they didn't give us any warning that this was coming. They called a press conference even before they had notified us that this was going to be the situation. And we've been working to, get out of it ever since. But
I think, like for me personally, I don't look at it as no strides have been made. I look at it as the systems aren't in place to provide that concrete data of the strides that have been made. But I mean, I look at 4 bodies that are sitting in front of us doing things every day in our schools. So, I mean, I think it's more a lack of data versus a lack of actual improvement. And I mean, I would almost say, let's figure out how the Department of Human Resources, Human Rights, originally did that study or survey, and I would wager things would look very different now.
Which has experienced its own transition in leadership, so they're also in a different place. But we have made great gains, and we're going to continue working on all of these pieces.
I think, too, it's important to put in this space that exclusionary practices and discipline as a tradition, as we know it, is as old as education. Like, it is the school system to exclude, to discriminate against people who are not white. And so we're trying to shift an institution that has hundreds of years of momentum behind it.
Yeah.
So it is, I appreciate your feeling, because it is infuriating and it is frustrating, and it is like we've put careers, decades into this. How have we not done more? And at the same time, we have hundreds of years of, like I said, momentum and history and structures that don't fit what we need it to do, because schooling, as we lived it, was not restorative. It was not particularly inspiring. It wasn't all about like staying together in community. And so I hear you and I feel you, but I think it's important that we recognize that we're trying to change an institution that's hundreds of years old.
thank you.
So-
I can appreciate that.
Paradigm shifting.
Yeah.
And Dr. Lightfoot wants us to understand that the monitoring agreement ended. There is no agreement now. So this is work that we are doing, not because we are required to, but because we desire to, and we know that it's what our students and our adults need and deserve.
If I may add, also, I worked with Infinite Campus and for many years, especially working in the media center. And one of the things that I did note, it's sometimes very hard to work with that system. And a lot of input that's needed is difficult to implement using that system, so I can empathize with you all trying to figure out how to document everything on Infinite Campus. It was hard for me. So, and I think maybe it's antiquated, I don't know. They just are not keeping up with the times, that's for sure. And also when you're in a fast environment, and Hopkins High School was like, you had to be on top of things all the time. So documenting things while you're trying to do a bunch of other things was incredibly difficult to do, and sometimes you're just so tired. So getting all that information on there is definitely a challenge. So,
Director Wetter?
You do not need to come to the table. You're welcome to stay there. I'm just curious, when we implemented Canvas, was there, I thought perhaps there was a plan to bring Infinite Campus and migrate that over to Canvas? Did that get, sorry. You could have just yelled. I would have been okay with it.
But our viewing public couldn't hear him.
Oh, fair.
Good evening again.
Hi again.
I guess taking those two questions in order. The first, just about the I guess, the earlier question about just tracking all of those pieces. And so one thing I think it's important to talk about with Infinite Campus is it is first a reporting structure for the state. So that's starting at the basis of what the system is built to do. Then on top of that, there are additional layerings of information that we think is important, has been added into the application over the years as other schools have found to be important. And certainly we're seeing a piece of that there again of our systems, which these designed really to meet the needs of the state are not aligning well with where we want to be.
Okay, I didn't realize that was our reporting mechanism. So that's a necessary evil, no matter how you slice it.
You're always going to have some sort of a reporting mechanism.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
that was easier than you thought it was going to be, wasn't it?
And I guess the second part, or then around that conversation around Canvas. So Canvas is our learning management system. There are some connections between the two. And as we look at our long-term goals around what that caregiver interaction is with all of the different pieces of data here at Hopkins, we see ourselves moving that direction. But there will always have to be some sort of a relationship connection data between those two pieces. Canvas and that learning side, we're also looking at that additional options, either add-ins or differently looking at it. One thing that we have been having a lot of conversations about recently is we know that when we first chose Canvas, we had a 3-year implementation plan, of which we did in about 2.5 weeks, as we had just chosen Canvas in the middle of February 2020, and then went to complete instruction in Canvas by the 3rd week of March. And
remember.
we're now going back and really looking at some of those pieces, and where does that fit with where we want to be going forward? Where does that not fit where we want that to be going forward? And down in the technology and IDL space, you'll find whiteboards full of what that structure might look like as we move forward.
Awesome, thank you.
Before you leave, are there alternatives to Infinite Campus? Are other school districts using something else?
Yeah, there are a few alternatives for your student information system. We've, over the years, looked at the different systems that are out there. And, what we look at, again, is kind of that student information system being that state reporting structure. Yeah. And where we look at our data, these types of data that we're talking about this evening, that probably isn't the location in any student information system for that type of information. And when we look at our MTSS data, our intervention data, instructional practices data around what this really looks like, it probably is going to be something different.
Yeah.
And the marketplace for that is pretty rapidly changing right now. I think the market is understanding that there's need there. And as we've looked forward into some of our data dashboarding and some of those other strategic goals that we're looking at, these conversations have been part of that, as all of these companies that do this work and work closely with schools are seeing a need here. But we're not there at the moment, but I think there's a lot of change happening there.
All right.
Thanks. I think it's becoming increasingly clear that we need to schedule some time for you at a workshop so that we can dive deep into the technology piece.
Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, I want to make sure that we're saving time. We've got 2 more agenda items this evening before the board meeting starts at 7. Are there any other questions specific to restorative practices in the district? I just want to thank all of you for being here tonight for this detailed and I feel like very illuminating report. This was a specific ask that have come from our students to reform the culture, the climate, our behavior, expectations, and practices across the district. to restorative rather than authoritative and punitive. And I appreciate your work so much on our family's behalf for this and to centering the student voice in everyday practice in our buildings. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks,
Thank
guys.
you. It's also very unique to have restorative specialist at every school within a district, so we're uniquely positioned to move the needle on this. So we're very grateful for the work of all of these leaders and their colleagues. Thank you all.
Now we will move on to getting an update on Kids and Company, which is exciting as we look at winter break.
At this time, we welcome our Director of Community Education, Alex Fisher, and our Director of, Jaleesa, what is your title? Youth and Children Program? Youth Programs, okay. Our Assistant Director, Coordinator, you know, I'm not a title person, actually.
I'll take all of them.
Miss Jaleesa. And John, welcome. And what is your name?
Mary Sampson.
Mary?
Yeah, I'm a supervisor in the Kids Company
Oh, wonderful. Welcome.
at Glen Lake.
Thank you for being here. So, as you know, board members and community members, Kids and Company is our before and after school childcare program. And it's not just childcare, it's truly an enrichment program where our children, our elementary children, have opportunities to build relationships with really high quality and caring adults, as well as just get into all kinds of arts and crafts and outdoor activities. I've been spending a couple hours every Wednesday afternoon with our Kids and Co team at Eisenhower, and literally, I'm impressed with the adults. I'm impressed with the program. The kids make me laugh, and so it's a really delightful place. So we wanted you to be able to have an update from our leaders here. So thanks again for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you. In just a minute, I'll hand it over to Jaleesa Smith Breedlove. We are so grateful for her leadership. She is like many people who are in school-age care, that they are individuals who greatly love being with students, who love educating students. They may not love being stuck in a classroom as a teacher, but they love being with students. And so they've come to this field because they are passionate about changing lives, and they're here today. And we're so grateful for Jaleesa. I think that I learned a lot about Jaleesa when she was having a conversation with Dr. Mary Peary Reed and myself, and she was talking to us about targeted services, because she's very passionate about targeted services. And she explained it as targeted services are like peas and macaroni. And I think Rhoda kind of knew what she was talking about, but I had no idea. So I was like, what do you mean? And she said the peas are kind of the academics, the stuff that you need, but the macaroni is the fun stuff, and you just kind of have to mix it up together, and they don't know what they're getting. So she really gets it. School-age care is one of those things that you don't really know is there until it's broken or it's not working, and then all of a sudden, as you know, you get the emails and you hear about it. But we're so grateful for everything that Kids Company does for the district, and tonight you'll hear a little bit more about that. So Jaleesa?
Yeah. So I have lots of great things to say about Mary and John. So John is like one of the supremo vets of Kids and Company, knocking on 31 years of service to Kids and Company. So we always appreciate him, his leadership, his flexibility, his endurance of serving such a complex program, but also it's hard to find folks who are veterans, but also open to change and know that change needs to happen and wants to pilot that change and drive that change and make sure that everyone is bought into that change. So I just appreciate him so much. And then Mary Thompson is our supervisor, a strong house, but very timid in her ways. She is the person who thinks of it first, but has to whisper it. She's one of those people that's been serving since she was 16 years old in Kids and Company.
The only job I've ever had.
Yes, it's the only job she's ever had. And so she has seen lots of change and opportunity for Kids and Company, and they have embraced me in my 18 months or so and given me the real deal on where we need to go. So they're really the ones driving. I just get to look cute in the passenger seat. So we just wanted to give you a brief update on Kids and Company. I'm gonna do the boring stuff, they'll do the fun stuff. So, like always. So right now we're serving 641 students in our 6 locations. We do still have a wait list right now of 149 students that are waiting for care. We did just do a cleanup, so we do have some families that have found other options with family as well as work schedules changing and those sorts of things. So some families we've reached out to them and learned more about what their needs are and how they've taken care of themselves. But some of those families that no longer need school-age care are in our non-school day care, which we've also seen an increase. So weather permitting, on Thursday we'll serve about 232 students on Thursday. This is done with 68 fierce staff. That includes 8 high school students that we were able to capture. One stayed from the summer, and then we were able to capture the other 6 from our fall recruitment efforts. And then 2 of those 8 students are actually Kids and Company alumni. So they've been in the program, and now they're working for the program. As a program, we are making some pretty big strides to align with Vision 2031. So last spring, we adopted some of our own core values as a program and what we want to lean on as we make change and serve students. So those values are strive for excellence, create community, uphold equity, lead with love, and inspire curiosity. These values align us to the work that we carry out every day, and also we lean on these when we go to make changes to serve our families as they continue to change. In addition to adding those core values, we're also doing great work to have intentional professional development that includes staff of all levels with committee work. We know that we have staff with a wealth of knowledge and experience that we should be utilizing those skills. So these committees include our culture and program development, also known as our fun committee. We gave it an important title, but it's our fun committee, which Mary is a part of, and taking a leadership role there. And then we have our policy and procedure committee, and then our enrichment and curriculum committee, which John is a part of. These committees are already been moving the needle and having meetings and filling them with fun and energy, as well as giving staff appreciation, so showing them how they can also have fun in the workplace. If you're not having fun working with kids, you're doing something wrong. So they're making sure that they remember and stay grounded in fun. We're also reviewing our current policies and procedures, like our parent handbook, our staff handbook, and that sort of thing, and preparing ourselves for accreditation in the next few years. And then John will share what the Enrichment and Curriculum Committee has been working on so far this school year. So we'll go on to the next slide for John to share.
Thank you. I'm part of the Enrichment and Curriculum Committee. We decided that we wanted something to hang our hat on, something that we could strive across the board for all 6 locations to really say, this is what we're about. Something that we felt we could, if we were to represent ourselves, how would we represent ourselves? So we started with Worldly Connections, which is being a contributor in the community, STEM activities and STEAM activities, including the arts, as well as health and wellness, and also service learning, which we think is really important for us to teach these kids that it's important to give back to community, and be an active member in the community, all while giving the kids the voice to be able to do that sort of things, and creating some social and emotional learning with that as well, which is basically what we do all day long, is provide those opportunities for kids to have some social emotional learning, but giving them the voice and responsibilities to create their activities and do that. It started out as something we wanted to do for our group and just in Kids and Company. Then we realized it's something more than that. It's something really that we wanted to be able to do to share with our parents and our community, to say this is what our program is about. When your child's in our program, our curriculum is based on these 4 core values for us, all wrapped into one neat little package. And then we decided it's even more than that. It actually could be something we could use as a marketing tool to say, when your child is in our program, this is what you can expect from us. We have representation from all 6 elementary schools, and we all agreed very quickly that this is something we could hang our hat on. So we're very proud of this little circle that we created, a little puzzle we created, because really it identifies each individual child. Each child is a puzzle in itself, and how do we interact with them to create what we think would be a strong human being. And it's nice to see, and we talk about those 2 of those 8 kids that are in Kids and Company that are former students, they're now high school students, both work with Mary and I. So they are students that are coming back to Glen Lake where we're both at. So they remember what it was like to be a part of that, and have joined us saying, we want to instill those same values that you've given to us, to those kids in the future. So we're very proud of that fact. So,
And I had them when they were in kindergarten and first grade, so I watched them go to 6th grade with us. So,
and we also know if they decide to get married, we'll have some very incriminating parent pictures to show their spouses that they can post on on their wedding photos.
We'll go to the next slide. And then Mary will share a little bit about our family and community engagement.
yeah, so we've, over the years, family events have been a big hit, and with COVID, that took a change, and this year we've really welcomed the families back into our building, and it's important for them to kind of see what happens with their kids. And so one of our big events in October, there's a national, it's called Lights On After School, just promoting how important after-school programs are to the community and to the kids. And each school does it a little bit differently. At Glen Lake, what we had done is we created a place, and we invited, last year, because parents weren't coming in, we invited teachers. Come and interact with your students. Come play with your students. You don't have to be teaching them. You don't have to discipline them. Come see what they do. The gym is always a big hit. We play games in the gym. We have like an art project for them to do, or just come in and play a game with them, color, come into housekeeping. And every school does it a little bit different, but it's a great way for us to showcase what we do and how we do it. And Tanglin, they've been doing it for the last few years. They've created a handmade market where they give kids the skills to create things, and then they sell them in this market. And I did not, I'm not at Tanglin, but that money they've been using to support scholarship funds for Kids and Company, which I think is a great thing. And we've even at Glen Lake we had so much fun with the Lights On After School, like we've done it twice now. We've had a Friday gym day. Come play with your kids in the gym. And John's had the gym full of parents and kids, and it's just the biggest hit. And that's something we also like to include the staff. And what I've seen is what has been great, just with the lack of connection we've had over the few years, even when we invite teachers down, they're getting to see these kids in a different way, and it's helping them build relationships. I went to school to be a teacher, but I decided I wanted to do Kids and Company because I wanted to be able to build those relationships. I don't want to worry about test scores and all those things, because for me, that's where it's at. And the community has supported us through COVID, especially at Glen Lake, and it's nice to be able to give back. And in the summer, we do family picnics, things like that. So it's been really great to just bring that community back in, because it really is a community from the kids up to the parents, and that's what it's all about for me. And in April is basically when we celebrate or get celebrated, and that's when, to keep on your mind, it's after school appreciation happens in April, so yeah.
But, so our next steps as we continue to grow and we get back to what we consider the norms I do want to highlight though for Tanglin that they've made over $6,000 for the scholarship, and that scholarship has sponsored their peers, not only for Kids and Company, but for youth enrichment as well.
Oh, nice.
So for them to be able to attend classes. And I also would like to share that that scholarship fund has even helped some families. We've sent 3 students to driver's ed, and we've heard stories. At first, we weren't quite sure about, driver's ed, something that you hear that privileged families attend. And these families were just so happy that they had that opportunity because they needed additional drivers to make their house work. So a mom called in and said, wait, I can really use it for driver's ed? And I go, well, yeah, we'd love to have you do driver's ed. And she explained, I really need an additional driver. I'm a single mom with 4 kids, and my teenager driving would make life so much easier for all of us. So just Kids and Company has a great impact on the whole district, I would say, with the things that they're teaching students and they're doing. But for next steps, we know that we're learning that we're more than just childcare. So now we go into the nerdy stuff and figure out our data. How do we know that we're impacting students? Because we can tell in a story form that a Kids and Company kid is a Kids and Company kid when you look at them. And so how do we tell that story with data? So that's some of our next steps as we strengthen ourselves. And then for staff, we are on this journey of youth work learning. So by the end of the school year, all of our staff will be trained as, have youth work certificates through YIPA, the Youth Intervention Prevention Association. So we're really excited about those 2 strides and formalizing ourselves. But anything else? I think that's it.
Thank you
All
so
right,
much
thank you.
for being here tonight and this great update. I will just quickly say I'm biased. My kids were Kids and Company kids and love the program and really appreciate the ways in which it's changed in response to community need. Are there any questions from my board colleagues?
Of course. I've always got a question. And I have to say, my kids were Kids and Company kids too, and they benefited greatly from that. And as did their parents, let me tell you. I see you've got 149 people on the waiting list, 149 kids, I guess, on the waiting list. How much more staffing would it require for you to address that backlog?
Yeah, so we would need at least 10 more staff to do that. That's something we're still working on. We are, though, on the brink of a partnership with one of our, pivotal vendors. I feel like he's more than a vendor. So we've actually been in talks with Skyhawks, and they'll be joining us to expand their programming to help us cater to those families.
What's the name of it?
Skyhawks Sports is
Oh.
the name of it. And so they'll
Okay.
be expanding some of their programming and working closely with us to learn and to serve those students.
Okay.
And we'll see a little bit of shuffle, because they are sports focused, but
Yeah.
that'll help us as we continue to increase our workforce.
Okay. And just in general, what's been the reaction among parents to the change in start times that's happening this year?
You're segueing us into our next topic.
Yes, I was just.
Thank you.
But I know it's had an impact on Kids and
Yes.
Company. We've had emails from parents.
Yes, we've had a mixed array of response. They've been supported and catered to at the site level, so our site staff being knowledgeable and empathetic to those families who it's been hard for has happened quite a bit. It's been tough for some families. Yes, the demand for care has went up and the need for additional things to do, childcare, supervision, safety, has increased. So in partnership with Youth Enrichment and Kids and Company, we're trying to take care of that need. And so we are planning ahead for next school year. And our goal is always to serve all families. And so we're holding true to that even as we're hitting towards the middle of the school year.
Is it harder to staff the morning kids and company, or any more or less in the afternoons?
No, our demand at the early start times has decreased for the early schools.
Yeah, we only have like, what, 9?
Yeah, 9 in the morning. But I would say but I would like to point out, getting out earlier has actually done something that I think that we didn't foresee, in the fact that it has given us an opportunity to build stronger relationships with the children because we have them for a longer point of time.
Yeah.
And I think that you see that if you come into the program at a 5 o'clock time, where you see kids laughing and giggling and smiling because they haven't had the stress of maybe coming a short term after school. They've gotten their homework done. They've had time to decompress. They've had time to spend time with their friends. Some of those things they didn't have in the past. So there has been a positive impact of making that change, because they also feel like they have another adult who they can be used as an ally. And I think that's an important piece to do it. It's refreshing to be able to spend a lot more time with kids, because you actually get to touch those kids who may be on the fringe more.
Yeah.
And as we talk about mental health things, it's nice to be able to say, my group right now, I have 22 to 23 on a daily basis. And I get a chance to spend more than just 5 or 10 minutes with those kids. So even though it has been a unique opportunity, I think there's been some benefits that we've seen that we probably didn't realize were going to happen that have come out of that.
Cool.
I could totally see that. As somebody whose kids were at Meadowbrook or are at Meadowbrook, and they would go into Kids and Co. at like 4:15, and I'd get them 45 minutes later. I mean, they just long enough to burn off the energy.
Now, we don't have families really start to pick up till 3:30. And, you know, in a normal year, that kid doesn't get much time, but we've had them, we get our kids at like 2:10 to help with dismissal process. We get them earlier. So they've already been with us for almost an hour, you know, and they've gone outside and they've had snack, you know, so they do get more time. Because there are some families that only need us for that little bit, but now that longer period of time.
And one way to look at it is, for us at Glen Lake versus our neighbor, you know, at Gatewood, is we've had an hour to be either outside or in the gym, giving them a snack and a chance to do some other activity before they even get out of school.
Yeah.
So we've had that time to build something into them. There have been challenges, but I think we've really found kind of our niche and our steam, and have really made it work really well.
Here's one quick question. I think I read an email from Dr. Haybison that they moved all the kids from Tanglin off of the afternoon waiting list and opened up 3 classrooms for a partner organization to come in and provide aftercare. Could you just verify that and share a couple details?
Yeah, so that is our Skyhawks partner that they're
Okay.
anticipating and making room for. And we're anticipating that they'll clear our wait list. So we'll advertise out to those families and give them priority for that programming.
Okay,
And they're creating space for them there.
thank you.
Great, I just want to be mindful of our time again. I know that school start times is a topic that lots of people have questions about. Thank you for making that conversation much more rich with your perspective on how it's impacting Kids and Co families.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Good evening, Dr. Lightfoot, and
Good evening.
welcome. So just a little bit of background for board members and community members, and then I think Nick will take it away. But we have worked, we've partnered with our Meadowbrook Community, junior highs, high school, transportation department, athletics department, around the start time conversation and decisions. And Dr. Lightfoot will explain that we did have an aspiration of a 2-tier system with elementaries on one tier, secondaries on the other. And we need to be mindful of the resource constraints, not only fiscal, but just the labor shortage that many industries are experiencing, and wanting to ensure that we'll have the drivers for the routes that we do, that we need to have in place for student pickup and drop off. So we have sent a message to all Hopkins staff and parents at this point and wanted to make sure that you have an opportunity for clarifying questions and/or talking points as you engage with our community members. And thank you, Nick, for all of the work involved in this.
Oh, certainly. And amazing thanks to all of the individuals that it takes to go into these decisions and these decision-making processes. All of our athletics and activities considerations, our principals, our routers, our schedulers, our drivers, all of the above. And it's a very complex process that I'll try to see how succinct I can be with here on the slideshow that I have. I want to make sure that this comes up for everybody in the presentation. I think I've got it linked there, but I'm not seeing it pop up. But we'll see what we can do. Oh, fantastic. All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about what I'll try to go through here just in some of the slides that I have. Be brief, but try to be succinct with specific pieces of information for you. Talk a little bit about the prior aspirations, the present reality, some modeling detail work that we did, and the anticipated tier times, just to make sure that you have those points. As we take a look, prior aspirations, we really had kind of built some, if we could get to the ideal components, that would have been a 2-tier transportation delivery service. That idea of pre-K through 5 starting at the same time and all secondary programs starting at the same time. And what we'd also really the aspiration of a fully staffed cadre of drivers as well for transportation, because that really is a key considering factor when we look at any kind of transportation system that we can run, because that really is the core component of making sure that we can be able to start when we're looking to start and run the school day as is scheduled. As a present reality side, we are seeing increased labor costs for the 22-23 school year and beyond. The labor shortage for bus drivers and transportation staff in general. What we are also seeing is the higher demand for full-time work hours for drivers and hour guarantees from other providers. What I mean by that is that we have drivers and a cadre of drivers in the past who might have been more comfortable with maybe an afternoon route, maybe a morning route, but now with the labor market as it is and demands for people's time, where we see the ability to get drivers that are committed to the program are when we can provide full-time work, which is that 6-hour kind of threshold that we look at, so that we can have full-time opportunities for individuals for benefits and higher rates of pay. There are many, and what I mean by that last part there are many organizations that are now guaranteeing hours so that someone will have a guarantee of 7 hours, so that guarantees the rate of pay. As you will note from our recruitment components that have been out there, we have had $4 to $5 an hour increases just within this year alone as part of our recruitment opportunities. And as driving companies become more competitive, it is how can you up the benefits, how can you up the guarantees, how do you secure the labor force? So we know that that is a critical consideration in what we're looking for. As part of the key modeling considerations, we did take a look at 2-tier and 3-tier sets. The models looked at cost per route, the number of riders, the number of buses needed, start times that would be run, how many routes we could get done in any given component. The key takeaways from those modeling and amazing work that our business services department did with our transportation partners. A 2-tier system decreases the available hours for drivers. In a 2-tier system, it compresses it. And so our ability to offer more hours for our drivers was limited. A 2-tier system also increases the number of buses that are needed in that structure to cover all of the routes. And with increased busing costs, it was significant when we looked at the overall modeling. The results themselves, and I'll be brief here knowing your time constraints, a 2-tiered system would require the following. If we were able to, even in our models, have it be at its possible threshold, routes would potentially need to begin at 6:45, one that was a strong consideration and conversation with the board previously about not wanting to start before 7 a.m. The additional expenditures would be around $1.7 million to provide for the increased number of buses and the number of drivers needed in a compressed period of time, even when there are shorter hours available. Two-tier system would shorten the available hours of work, as I mentioned, with the estimate of 2 hours for each driver. And a three-tier system would be the most effective and efficient if ridership were balanced in each of the tiers. And that becomes important because if we have singleton, what we call just kind of singleton routes, where we needed more here and less here, that is far more difficult to find drivers to staff versus balancing it out so we have mostly full-time routes. So what does that look like? It looks like the next slide. If you can see briefly with just the ridership, you'll see that if we were looking at three-tiered, where all of elementary were on one, tier 2 being the high school, tier 3 being west and north, you'll see that in tier 1, 1943 looks very different than tier 3, 1089. With that number of riders and that number of buses, you would be able to make the conclusion that tier 1 needs more drivers, but that is not going to extend the number of hours for our drivers. It compresses singleton routes in tier 1. In that balancing and the balancing work that we did, you'll see the three-tier balancing rider numbers in tier 1, 2, 3. And when we moved Meadowbrook to tier 3, based on its number of riders, that was the most balanced that we could get those numbers to be with estimated ridership. So when you look at that distribution was more ideal for us in the overall picture of having to look at what was possible and what would distribute the number of routes so that we could be as the most efficient opportunities that we could find for cost and for staffing and for delivery. What that translates into is with the three-tier component that we have, what we did is we went back and looked at that three-tier and the balanced approaches. You'll see that the high school maintains close to where it starts now, 825 in the estimated components. And there again, these are dependent on the routing and the actual routing and the software that goes into where the number of stops are and all of those additional items once we have that in more detail. But for right now, these are the estimates. You'll also see north at 910, you'll see west at 920. There's a reason for that. Speak to that in a little bit. Meadowbrook you'll see at 925 in that tier component there in that third element. And then the 5 elementaries in that last column in that 740 and 230. Part of the reason that you see this structure and some variance in the structure is that Meadowbrook with the elementary schools needs to have its time reflected as the 5 other elementaries for the length of the school day. That's where you'll see those adjustments made in that third tier. The other adjustment in the third tier that was important was when we had conversations about looking at the athletics and activities and the participation in the high school. With the high school ending earlier and the middle level programs ending later, what we did in collaboration with our principals and our athletics and activities staff is we collaboratively looked at the structure of the schedule within the middle level for allowing for the end of the day win activities, the end of the day other kinds of structures that provide for different opportunities, different individual learning opportunities to be developed at the end of the day, looking at that last half hour to 45 minutes to allow individuals to have those opportunities at the end of the day where we would be looking at the core academic scheduling structured differently throughout the course of the day. That was some feedback that we did hear. There was a way to preserve that opportunity and to have more flexibility at the end of the day. And the other opportunity that we looked at was if North ended earlier, the facilities would allow then deeper opportunity to be used at North where more of the activities were happening in those afternoon options and opportunities and where the need was seen from the athletic staff and looking at facility use, looking at field use. The ability then with West to be a little bit later allows for North facilities to be utilized more effectively, and that's where you see that 10-minute variance. The other piece that we discussed was a shuttle option. That shuttle option would allow individuals from West to go to North and the high school, and that shuttle would be there at the end of the day during that win time or other structured opportunity time at the end of the day so that we could get those individuals transported via shuttle so that we could maximize the connected times as much as possible with the athletics and the activities at the latter part of that afternoon for the high school. I know that's brief. I'm trying to compress a bunch of this in a very short period of time, and I wanted to make sure that you had some of those detailed pieces. But, I mean, in closing remarks, times are subject to change. We're working more closely with our transportation department on that. As always, we have a continued recruitment and retention effort for drivers. It is essential that we get and keep and retain qualified individuals. Can't say that enough. Further specifics are being developed with the Athletics and Activities Department, specific schedules. That building work is now being done as we have these templates to build off from. End-of-day win and other SEL and support opportunities are what we're structuring with the middle-level programming and the 6-9 transition. And then lastly, the before and after care opportunities at the middle levels also being developed and planned, staffed by the amazing people that you just had the opportunity to spend some time with a little bit earlier. So with that, available for questions that would be helpful to address.
Thank you so much for the information and the brevity. Looking at the clock, anyone have any questions? We have a few minutes, I think.
Chair Andreessen.
Yes, Treasurer Adams.
Nick, we got an email from someone that said, why can't we start the high school at the same time as North? Because my kid gets driven to school by his senior high student, brother or whatever. And I think I understand it from what you've just explained here. It's more driven by the bus routes, right? So that.
Absolutely.
That's why they cannot share the same start time.
Yep, and the distribution of riders at any given time.
Right.
To make sure that we have those routes staffed.
Okay, thanks.
I just had some quick clarifying questions. As someone who had students attending West Junior High and have to take the shuttle bus to the high school to be involved in sports, is that the piece that you were talking about, which direction is the WIN and SEL enrichment opportunities? Is it for those middle school students who aren't taking a shuttle to the high school, or is it for the students at the high school that will be maybe waiting around for their counterparts to show up on the team? Could you just quickly?
Sure, and these are the timing elements that we're looking at as buildings really kind of more come together with the finalization of their schedules in general. But the structure of the afternoon will create the space so that those that need to utilize the shuttle can utilize the shuttle to get to where that location would be. Some locations are at West, some locations are at North, depending, just for swimming pools, for example, in utilization of the space. So there are shuttles going to multiple places at different times. And in the coordination of that, part of the way that we gained some efficiency with that is to have one be earlier, one be later. And then what the shuttle would do is provide that opportunity for those that would be looking at using that and then creating that end-of-day WIN or SEL opportunities for those students that were there that would normally be accessing those. Presently, many of those are at the start of the day, and they're looking at distributing some time at the start, some time at the end, and then making sure that the core components, those core content, the course component materials on the academic elements are in the midsections, because that was the feedback that we heard as well, is that we don't want to have a lot of that academic impact as another element of this work as well.
Great, thank you for that clarification. I don't think there are any more questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
For the update.
Thank you, Nick.
Thanks.
Well, that gives us time for about a 10-minute break. I will see all of you back here around at 7 o'clock sharp. We'll get started.
All right.
Thank you. table so we can start our meeting this very chilly evening.
Everybody's
I know, it's because it's 39 degrees in here, Steve.
Is it?
It is cold.
I don't know, but.
Oh, reach out your coat on. Yeah. Look at Alec, or Oscar.
I know.
I think.
Well, thank you all for being here this evening, and welcome to the Hopkins School Board regular meeting for December 20th, 2022. We're going to go ahead and get started at 7:02 p.m. And we start off our agenda with a call to order. We start off most of our board meetings with an open agenda, making room for public comment. It's important for the school board to hear from our community. We do have it in two sections. The first public comment section is for items on the agenda. There are no public comments cards that were submitted for this portion of public comment. Elise, were there any voicemails submitted? Thank you. So no public comment for this section. We do have another one at the end of the meeting for items not on the agenda and have received comment cards for that section. Very grateful for those and for hearing from our community directly. So that allows us to move into a favorite part of our meetings, student board representatives reports. And I believe, Oscar, you are here this evening representing the student board representative cohort. I don't know if anyone's joined us virtually, but I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair Andreessen. I am Oscar Wolf. I'm one of the senior student board reps. I'd like to use my report today to talk about a more long-term issue in the district, and that is extracurriculars. Specifically non-athletic extracurriculars. So when I say clubs throughout this, I'm referring to clubs that are not sports. So when somebody creates a club at Hopkins, they really have three options for funding: fundraising, external funding, or the HEF grant. All three of these methods have some pretty big flaws. First would be fundraising. First of all, fundraising takes a ton of effort and time, and also often it doesn't actually work that well. Often it's ineffective. But even if everything is in place, it's really, really hard to fundraise if you don't already have a club. Fundraising is great for established clubs who already have infrastructure, who already have members, but if you've just created a club, fundraising often isn't an option. We also have so many clubs at Hopkins that if the expectation is that every club is responsible for their own fundraising, we will have a fundraiser every single day of the year. So next would be external funding. The problem with this is that it's not a choice. It's not an option. You can't opt into external funding. There's certain clubs at Hopkins, for example, the Jewish Student Union is part of a national organization, so they receive funding through that organization. Our HHS for Choice Club receives funding from Planned Parenthood. So those clubs are receiving funding, but it's not from Hopkins. So then the last way that clubs are receiving funding is the HEF grant, which let me first say is a great grant and a great program, but there are flaws and parts of our system that doesn't address. Firstly, it's just that the application is an obstacle. Starting a club at Hopkins is not nearly as easy as it should be. When I started my philosophy club, I think it was about 2 years ago, I was pretty shocked to find out that we didn't have a digital form. It doesn't exist. It's paper. It's also, as far as I can tell, not on the website anywhere of how to find it. And if it is, the fact that I couldn't find it kind of proves the point. But after someone goes through the application process, they've had to find an advisor, they've had to do all these things, they don't really want to do another application for funding. So what we're left with is a bunch of unfunded clubs. Another problem with the HEF grant is that it doesn't pay for everything. For example, in my philosophy club, one of the questions I get almost every single meeting is, why don't you provide snacks? It's the end of the day, people are hungry, they've had a long day at school, simple request. But the answer is because there isn't money for it. HEF will not pay for food, and I understand the reasoning behind it. Snacks are not essential, but in my opinion, the whole point of extracurriculars is that they're extracurriculars. It's not essential, it's something to enrich the experience. And the fact of the matter is that if I did provide snacks, I would have more participation. More people would show up. Increased investment is going to lead to increased engagement. It isn't just for food, though. I was talking to a member of our esports team. Full disclaimer, I'm not totally familiar with the West Metro esports scene at the time, but they were trying to get a coach. They applied for the HEF grant to get a coach because all of the competitive teams in the area have one, and they were denied. And that was the end of it. There is, if the HEF grant doesn't fund it, there really is no other way other than coming up with the money on your own. I've talked to a lot of people about this issue. I've brought it up at our Policy and Monitoring Committee meeting. I've talked to our high school administration, and it seems to me that almost everybody agrees that the only real long-term solution to this issue is that non-athletic clubs need funding at the district level. There has to be some money set aside for clubs that doesn't take an extra hoop to jump through to get. This won't be an easy fix, and that's because our extracurricular system isn't very streamlined. There isn't a perfect list anywhere. In addition to the fact that we only have the paper application, which can be a PDF, but it's not digitized. So the application process is difficult. Our website is not accurate. It was finally updated, so it's no longer years out of date, but it's not totally accurate. The list that we have is actually from a form that I created for the activities fair, but that means if a club leader missed that email or just didn't fill out the form, they are not listed anywhere. So there are currently clubs meeting and working at the high school that are not listed publicly anywhere. Maybe the athletics department or activities department has a list privately somewhere, but it isn't available for anyone to see. And that is the real problem in implementing this, is that we don't have a perfect list of all the clubs. And so there are two prongs to the solution that I see. I think number one, we need to streamline the entire extracurricular system. It's got to be easier to start a club, and it's got to be kept track of all in the same place. And once we have that list, once we have that system that's working, all of our clubs need funding from the district. Thank you.
Thank you, Oscar. I appreciate that update. Does anyone have any questions or comments for Oscar?
I have a question. I apologize if I missed this, but why isn't there just a simple, even if it's long, a simple list of all of the clubs available?
I think that the application being kind of messy is the reason for that. When I made my philosophy club, I had my piece of paper. I had it signed by my club advisor. I gave it to her, and that was the end of it. I never heard anything back. I don't know what the activities department has, but as far as I know, they haven't kept track, or if they have, it's not public and not on the website.
I have a question.
Yes, Director Hartland.
I, as a parent, think that that would be fantastic because I personally have come across clubs or enrichment activities and I'm like, wow, that sounds great. I had no idea that existed or how to get involved with it. And it was kind of a hotbed topic when we were doing like an intro to the junior high experience. I know that what you're talking about is kind of possibly specific to your building, but I think it's a district-wide phenomenon. And I was wondering if you, obviously, there's a big range, but for funding for a club, so you can kind of have like a bare minimum of operations, is it $1,500 a year? Like what kind of money are you talking about?
That's where it starts to get a little tough when it comes to exactly how much each club should be receiving, because some clubs, I mean, Philosophy Club doesn't take that much to run. But certain clubs are putting on events or doing much bigger things. So I think that it would probably have to go by number of members to some degree, just because the range is so massive. But the real problem is that there's nothing right now. Even something to work with is something, but right now there's just nothing. And one other thing that I did forget to mention is the teachers involved. Right now, teachers are not paid for staying for extracurriculars, but they can't happen unless there's a teacher there. So it puts us in a very difficult situation where we're basically asking teachers to volunteer their time for us to have a club. So I think that in addition to funding the club itself, some attention definitely needs to be given to the question of whether or not teachers should be getting paid for leading these clubs, or at least being there.
And some are student-led? Or
Yes,
there's always an adult advisor?
I believe the official rule is that there needs to be an adult there, but most of the clubs that I know of are really student-led, but the advisor still has to be officially there and signed on and the leader of the club.
Okay. Well, since this is recorded, we can ask our Director of Athletics and Activities, as well as our Director of Business Services, to watch this, and then we could maybe coalesce a group of people to think through some possible solutions. So thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Oscar. I appreciate you bringing this up. Clubs, and in particular student-led clubs, are a really important part of the experience here at Hopkins. I know they were for my students, and still are, actually. So thank you. I would like to hand it over to Dr. Mary Peary-Reed for the superintendent report.
Thank you, Chair Andreessen, and thanks, Elise, for presenting. So, per usual, we have a lot going on in Hopkins Public Schools, lots and lots of amazing things, and some weather decisions to make. So if you look through the window back there, there's a team huddled together trying to figure out how we are going to solve for apparently 10 drivers who are currently not able to come in tomorrow, and then true weather-related factors. So stay tuned. I think our Director of Communications and Marketing is working on a letter to staff or families. So I would love to highlight some of the incredible teaching and learning and work that is happening within our system. And first, I want to let our school board members and also community members, if you have some flexibility in your mornings, Monday through Friday, the wetlands is open again. Now, if you remember, this is the cafeteria adjacent to the student cafeteria in Eisenhower Elementary. And so the wetlands is staffed by our employees within nutrition services, and the wetlands is open from 8 to 10 every morning for caribou coffee and tea and breakfast snacks, and we are trying to find ways of promoting this within our internal community here at the district office, but also some of the folks who may be in close proximity. So please come to the wetlands when you have some time. On Saturday, we celebrated our bus drivers. I just talked about our bus drivers and how grateful we are that they show up and drive every single one of our students safely to school and back home. And during challenging weather conditions, it can get really tricky, right, with 50 or 60 kids on a bus and slippery roads. And so we're so grateful to our bus drivers. I should say, Lake Country and the Transportation Department threw a holiday party for the bus drivers and Lake Country staff this past Saturday. And so apparently they spent more than 10 hours decorating the bus garage, this very huge vacuous space where we normally house all of the buses. They decorated the whole place with lights and wrapping paper and had a DJ, great food, cookie decorating contest, and drivers and lots of children were there to really enjoy themselves. So I enjoyed also being there, chatting with our drivers and just, learning about their families and how hard they work for our students. So it was really a pleasure to get to know our drivers, and grateful to the Lake Country staff for hosting that party. Also on Saturday, I provided a brief keynote message to girls wrestlers from across the entire state of Minnesota who all came together at the Royals Athletic Center for the Hopkins Athena Invitational Wrestling Tournament. So there were 130 female wrestlers who arrived to participate and, man, threw themselves on those mats and demonstrated so much strength that I was really in awe of what they could do in 1 or 2 minutes to, pin the other young lady, or, all kinds of action was happening on these mats. It wasn't something that I would ever want to do, but I was very impressed with their strength and persistence. And what I talked with the girls about is just really recognizing them for being brave and for stepping into traditionally all boys, all male spaces, and for them to just continue following their passions, even if it means stepping into spaces where girls and women are not prevalent. So really proud of those girls. We have one of our wrestling coaches is Coach Kelly. She's actually a teacher in the Minnetonka district, but she's a national female wrestling champion. And then we also have Coach Billy Beringer here, as well as Ben Cousins, who coach our girls, and we're excited to grow girls wrestling here in Hopkins. I wanted to put a spotlight on the rigorous learning and problem solving happening in our elementary spaces. So this is not a random photo of painted cardboard. These are the 6-week concept-based inquiry projects completed by first graders in Mr. Martin's class at Meadowbrook. So these students imagined how they could create an arcade inspired by Kane's Arcade. And Mr. Martin's instruction was interdisciplinary, so that standards across all content areas shared the project's purpose and vision, and the project was guided by a central idea, the key concept of communication, guiding questions, and focused on the learner, the Vision 2031 learner and IB learner trait of being a critical thinker. This authentic project valued student voice, helped them find the importance of using their voice to dictate each detail of the project. And so as you can see, the arcade games represented all shapes. They had light and sound. They involved number patterns as well as characteristics of effective game rules. I also learned from Mr. Martin that for his first graders learned how to manage their time during this 6-week period. They learned how to engage in self-directed facilitating their project development, and worked on building their growth mindset. So we're really proud of these first graders and, you know, all of our elementary students who are engaged in authentic project-based learning and really focusing on important overarching concepts such as communication. Finally, these students will present their projects to authentic audiences, folks coming in from the community, and then do some reflection at the end. So thank you, Mr. Martin, for facilitating the teacher-guided but student-centered learning. And another spotlight on elementary learning, these are students at Gatewood. And so our instructional coach over there, Tracy Beaverson, applied for and received an HEF grant for students to work with Urban Boat Builders. And if you remember, Urban Boat Builders partnered with Alice Smith before the pandemic and helped 5th and 6th graders build wooden canoes. So they're back working with even younger students at Gatewood. This partnership has given students the opportunity to learn woodworking by building foldable camping chairs. So students built their own chairs and then painted, wood burned, and oiled their own chairs. So really proud of those students as well. And then wanted to spotlight secondary learning. And Principal Ballard is here in the audience. In her weekly parent newsletters, she is sending out videos highlighting observations she's making as she visits various classrooms at the high school and talking in depth about the quality of the learning happening in those environments and the skills and the academic skills and the attributes that students are gaining as a result. So that's one source of information if you want to get some glimpses of learning happening at the high school. But I wanted to share that our high school's math league competed in their 3rd mathematics meet of the school year. This was a couple days ago on December 19. They had a really strong meet, finishing 1st in Section 6 AAA. 23 scholars competed, led by 3 captains, Merlin Phillips, Chloe Bushman, actually 4 captains, B. Durham, and Landing Herring, and the results are on the screen there for you to view. We did ask for a team photo, but Mr. Herring, he didn't have one with all of the students in it, so once he has a photo complete with all of the mathematicians, then we'll share it with you. So hats off to those student mathematicians. And then also when I was at our high school yesterday, I visited one of the wellness spaces, and this space is fondly known as the Dreamline space. The space, as well as the wellness specialist in the space, are supported by funds secured through a partnership between the Santa Foundation, Hopkins Public Schools, Hopkins High School, the City of Hopkins, and Hennepin County. And so all of these entities came together to fund a Dreamline coach from the Santa Foundation. This is Mr. Kendall, who runs the space and has the capacity to serve 25 students who are in need of Tier 2 or 3 support or tutoring. And we are funded to, Principal Ballard, we're funded to have 2 coaches, correct? 2 coaches and a coordinator, I think. But I did want to share that staffing shortages are affecting the Santa Foundation's ability to hire all of the coaches they need for all of the schools they partner with. So it's something that we're still continuing to work on. And then finally, I'll just end with a reminder to our board members and community that we continue to work on our strategic plan implementation process. So we do have our 3 goal areas in learning and teaching, operations, and culture. And we have now developed a cadence of project monitoring and management. And so I don't want to take up too much time to go into great detail about what this cycle looks like, but I'm really proud of the work that all of our leaders who are both sponsors and project managers for the deliverables within these 3 goal areas, all of the work that they have done to ensure that Vision 2031 is bolstered by a really thoughtful strategic plan, and that it's detailed enough to monitor the progress we're making against every deliverable mentioned in that plan. And that will be it for my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mary Perry Reed. That was really exciting to see specific examples of some of the things we've been talking about in more theoretical ways at the board table. So the pictures of those folding chairs was pretty exciting. Are there any questions or comments from my board colleagues? So I need to back up a little bit and do a proper welcome to this board meeting. I am chairing in place of our chair, Jen Westmoreland, and forgot to do something that we do at all our meetings, where our board colleagues, we all introduce ourselves to our community so that people are aware of who we are and how we are connected to the district. So Director Hartland, I would like you to start giving just a brief introduction.
Certainly. Hi, I am Rachel Hartland, and today's meeting kind of wraps up my first year on the board. And I am a district parent and a resident of Minnetonka.
Hi, I'm Katie O'Shea Peterson. 2 kids in the district, 5th and 6th graders at Meadowbrook.
Steve Adams in my 11th year, wrapping up my 11th year of being on the school board, and the parent of 2 adult graduates of Hopkins Public Schools.
Good evening. I'm Rhoda Mary Peary Reed, Superintendent. I've been in my role for 6 years. I have a 5th grader at Eisenhower, a 9th grader at North, and a stepson who's a kindergarten para at Eisenhower.
Thank you. My name is Shannon Andreessen, reluctant chair, and I'm in my wrapping up my 3rd year on the board, and I parent 2 Hopkins students, a recent graduate who is at the U of M, and a 9th grader at West.
Hi, everyone. My name is Tanya Khan. I have had 2 kids in the district. They both graduated, and both are currently attending the University of Minnesota. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Jason Ross. I have 3 children. Oh, let me take a step back. I'm wrapping up my first year as well on the board, similar to Director Hartland. I have 3 children in the district, all attend Tanglin. I have 2 4th graders, 1 1st grader. I keep forgetting that. Yeah, and I currently live in Minnetonka and been there for, 8 years now.
We all know Oscar.
I'm Oscar.
No last name needed.
No.
But Oscar is the president of our student council as well, so that's highly significant.
Yes, it is. Gives a lot back to the district. So with that, we will move on to the approval of the agenda. I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
I have a first and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And we have an approval of the agenda. I'm not quite sure what the wording is there. Is it 6 ayes, 0 nays?
Yeah.
And now we can move on to the consent calendar. The items on the consent calendar are usually considered to be more routine in nature. And we are looking for approval of the consent calendar. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Thank you, Director Peterson. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Director Hartland. There is a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? None. The motion is approved. And we will move on to the treasurer's report.
All right, thank you, Chair Andreessen, Vice Chair Andreessen, whatever. I'll try and get through this because I forgot my reading glasses at home, so.
Do you want me to hold it for you? You want these?
Thank you. Let's see how these look. All right, that's much better. All right. Expenses of note this time include $316,000 to District 287 for October through December services. Usually we pay those monthly, so, but I know there's some new management over there, so maybe they're billing quarterly now. But that's how much we pay them for our special ed and other services. $308,398 for a parking lot project at Meadowbrook. $22,000 for snow removal for the period November 14th through December 13th. It's that time of year. $17,903 for McGraw-Hill Everyday Math, a one-year subscription. This is kind of indicative of the way that our curriculum materials are going these days. Rather than hard copy materials, we're more typically subscribing to an online version or online source for particular curricula. $3,920 for ensemble instruction on Afro-Cuban Latin jazz, which was paid for by a HEF grant. And thank you to the Hopkins Education Foundation for that. There's other things that come up that you sometimes don't realize that are part of a school district's operation, but $2,600 for a rehearsal pianist for the Legally Blonde musical at the high school. In another indication of where technology is moving, $1,767 for an AP biology ebook, not hard copy. But then, for the West Junior High Media Center, $1,043 for actual books. So those are some expenses of note this time. And with that, I move that we approve total disbursements in the amount of $1,554,710.03 for the period of November 29, 2022 to December 13, 2022.
Thank you. I have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion is approved. Thank you for the report, Treasurer Adams. You are seeing Dr. Mary Perry Reed leaving the board table. There is emerging discussion around school tomorrow. So it's not that she doesn't want to be part of our unfinished business, which is a policy discussion around Policy 209, School Board Code of Ethics and Operating Principles. And thank you. Assistant Superintendent Nick Lightfoot is here for us to facilitate this conversation. At the regular meeting that was held on November 15th, board members voted to return this policy to the monitoring committee for further review and revisions. The monitoring committee met and did just that with the help of Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot around language changes that reflected the discussion that we had earlier at the board table. And we've presented the reviewed language and changes. I hope everyone's had a chance to review that. It was in our board packet. And yeah, hoping this discussion can continue.
And I think in the crafting of the language, what we really tried to highlight was the accountability component. And we tried to encapsulate the language of the statute in a way that was based on accountability. And then what we also wanted to do was to give clear guidance to the board about options and opportunities and create flexibility. So trying to do that in as few words as possible, but with some good intent along the way. Would definitely be open to any additional insights, thoughts, or comments that board members would have around the draft language that we have in front of you this evening.
Chair Andreessen.
Yes, Treasurer Adams.
Nick, I appreciate, and I want to express my thanks to the entire Policy Management Monitoring Committee for taking up this issue. I know it was my particular issue, and I'm appreciative of the effort that was put into it. I've read the state statute regarding vacancy of a school board member, and I noticed that it says that if a school board member cannot attend for not less than 90 days because of illness or prolonged absence from the district. It doesn't say from the board table.
So, did you read the proposed?
I did.
Okay.
I did, but I'm just addressing the state law first. I thought it was interesting that you have to have a reason for being absent. And I know in some cases that I'm familiar with, the board member just didn't show up, you know? And it's not just limited to school boards. I know that, because I've had conversations with people that serve on city councils, and they have similar kinds of concerns. A lot of people run for school board or city council or some other, public entity. And once they get in there, they realize they don't have the authority that they thought they had. And they lose interest and they stop showing up. And I think we have to have ways to deal with that. But I really appreciate the revised wording that the Policy Monitoring Committee came up with on community accountability. And it addresses my concerns. So I appreciate the effort that you put into it. We'll see if I hope we never have to invoke it, but we'll see if we have to do that in the future.
Absolutely. I appreciate the discussion. In particular, it allows us to be held accountable by our community as well as each other, and I think keeps intact one of the things I like best about serving on a board, in that our authority, as you said, or our ways of making change and moving things along is collective. We are not individuals when we are at this table, so
Right.
I appreciate that very artful language that was used to make that happen. Anyone else have any thoughts? Great. So with that, I will move that the above policy, that the board approves the above policy in first read, and further that the board directs the administration to prepare the policy with suggested revisions for approval in second reading at the next meeting as part of the consent calendar.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? And so the motion is carried. We will move on to new business. This is one of my favorite times of the year when the Legislative Action Coalition presents their platform for the upcoming legislative session. I would like to invite Treasurer Adams and I believe Director Hartland down to the end of the table, and the co-chair of the LAC, Michelle Pasco, and other members who have worked hard on this platform to come up and join us. And thank you for all the work you do.
Everyone have a seat. Well, thank you for having us tonight. I'm glad that you think this is one of the most fun parts of the year. So. It's always interesting. The Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition, just to refresh people's memories and educate those people that might be watching, serves as the mouthpiece for the Hopkins School District with our legislators that represent us in the state legislature. And as such, we have to have our platform approved by the board before we can go forward and contact our legislators about our issues. Just to give you a brief overview of where we're at this year with the legislature. In retrospect, looking back, the 2022 session of the state legislature was stymied because the GOP walked away from an agreement that was reached with the governor and the House of Representatives, and the Senate GOP essentially walked away from it. And it was surmised at the time that they thought that perhaps they could sweep the election this last fall, and then they could have the opportunity to dole out the surplus that the state has socked away. And as we all know, that did not happen. The DFL swept the House and the Senate and the governor's seat. And subsequently, two of our representatives, Representative Pryor and Representative Joachim, have been appointed to to chair the education committees in the House. One of our senators, Senator Steve Swedzinski from Eden Prairie, has been named to the Education Committee leadership position in the Senate. So we have some very good representation this year at the state legislature. And meanwhile, the state surplus, which is about $9 billion last session, has now swelled up to almost double to $17.9 billion. So there's a lot more money to be dispensed in some fashion. Both the AMSD and Minnesota School Boards Association are proposing 5% this year, or in the coming year, and 5% the following year on the formula, the state funding formula for education. So that's as aggressive as I ever recall an ask being. And obviously the money's there if there's the political will at the state legislature to grant that. And hopefully this will be the end of a 20-year erosion of funding for education in the state of Minnesota. As it stands right now, our per student funding in the state, as adjusted for inflation, has gone down by $1,000 per student in the last 20 years. So we as a district are getting about $1,000 less per student than we did 20 years ago. And it's causing some real havoc, especially in the rural areas where they don't have such a rich commercial tax base as we do. But unfortunately, it means more funding has been shifted to the property tax owners in our district. So we're optimistic this year that we can restore some of the funding, not necessarily back to the 2003 level, but restore it in some respect. So I think things are looking fairly good this year for education in the state of Minnesota. Before we go on with the platform, I think we should introduce the members of the LAC, and we'll start down here with Rachel.
Well, hello, I am Director Rachel Hartland. I feel like I just got done saying this 7 or 8 minutes ago.
How many
but
students do you have in the district? No.
How many years have I been? I've been on the board for 1 year now and the LAC for a bit under that, and I do have students in the district and am very motivated by this idea that the state of Minnesota is sworn to be a partner with our school districts in educating our students, and I'm excited about the LAC's work.
Steve Adams, been on the LAC for all 11 years that I've been on the board, and I've co-chaired it with Michelle for, I don't know, the last 5? Who knows? All right. Pre-pandemic, anyway.
Michelle Pasco. I have 2 children who, they're not children anymore, they're adults, they're out, gone, away. But they went through Tanglin North and the high school, and we had wonderful experiences. And I was on the LAC a million years ago when they were little, and then took some time off, now I'm back. And it's just so important that, and our legislators have said again and again, they appreciate so much our help in them understanding our education issues, that because we're talking statewide. We advocate for Hopkins and we advocate for all our students in Minnesota. And so our job is to educate our legislators so that they can move forward and make sensible bills or strike down unsensible nonsense bills, and try to move forward for our students. And so that's our job, and we take it very seriously.
I'm Catherine Callahan. I'm the legislative liaison for the LAC, and I have 2 grown kids who went through Hopkins all the way from kindergarten through 12, and they too are out and about in the world.
I am Jen Cameron. I have 2 kids in the district. One is a 4th grader at Tanglin and a 7th grader at North. And I could never say as eloquently about my feelings on the LAC as any of my previous 4, so I'll just say what they said.
And you're looking very festive this evening.
Thank you. I keep it professional for the rest of the crew. They'd get out of hand without me.
Right.
So our platform is addressed to the legislators. So all our language, everything we say in here is all addressed to them. So that's why it may sound like why would we be saying this to teachers? We're not saying this to teachers. We're talking to our legislators, and we will present this in January to them, pending your approval. The time to invest in our students' future, in Minnesota's future, is now. A fresh start, a new beginning. It's time to see education through a new lens. With a global pandemic largely behind us, the world has emerged with new ways of seeing. America's education landscape is now filled with digital technologies, and staff and students are fluent in cyber literacy. Along with all of this technology comes the realization that interpersonal, social, and soft skills are more necessary than ever. Relationships between students and teachers, families and schools, community members and leaders are at a new level of relevance. With your help, we can see and fully support all of these education stakeholders. We can bring public education funding in line with inflation. We can feed learners who need sustenance. We can honor inclusivity. We can support families with in-school wraparound services. We can see each and every learner and serve their individual needs. We can create a vibrant future for Minnesota. Moving forward into 2023, Hopkins Public Schools seeks to strengthen and simplify the strategies that worked best during the past few pandemic years. We ask the Governor's Office and the Minnesota Legislature to partner with us to immediately accelerate funding and to allow school districts to expand much-needed services for our scholars and their families.
Hopkins LAC's highest priority for 2023 will be to reform and stabilize the education funding formula to provide essential services to all Minnesota students, to keep pace with inflation, and to provide a consistent and realistic funding stream that allows school districts to engage in long-range planning.
We ask that they eliminate the special education and English language learner cross subsidies by delivering promised state dollars and by working with federal legislatures to capture promised but never delivered federal funds.
We ask that they provide all families with simple, secure, and sustainable early education funding to offer brilliant futures to every young Minnesotan, regardless of socioeconomic status.
And we ask the legislature to expand and stabilize mental health supports and services by increasing and stabilizing funding, resources, and access.
We ask the legislature fully fund public school nutrition programs so Minnesota families have equitable access to healthy meals, contributing to overall community health and food security.
We ask that the legislature eliminate compensatory funding qualification based on free and reduced lunch applications and move towards community eligibility for essential services.
We ask that they support your investment in Reimagine Minnesota to ensure that public education remains, as written in our Minnesota Constitution, a duty of the state legislature.
Further, we ask that they empower locally elected school boards to do the job for which they were elected by granting local control to renew existing operating referenda, set school calendars, and allow for flexible and innovative spending priorities.
And we ask that the legislature direct the legislative auditor to audit the Minnesota Department of Education in an effort to update and reform outdated processes and procedures which have become disconnected from reality, including cumbersome and inefficient reporting requirements, mandated seat time versus online learning, barriers to hybrid learning, restrictive teacher licensing procedures, and many more issues. And that's about all we are asking for. That's all. And we have each of these items, we have a lot more background information that we will proceed to give to the legislators and explain each of these fully.
Wonderful. Thank you for presenting the 2023 legislative platform. Are there any questions or comments from my board colleagues?
I had a comment.
Yes, Director Khan.
And thank you all for your hard work. Many of you I've known for years, and I know how dedicated you all are to this very important cause. I did have a suggestion, because it's come to my attention recently that we need more paras. And I was wondering if there could be an added ask to the state to give us more possible federal dollars for paras. A lot of our paras are not paid enough, and some of them also aren't given the proper training to address a lot of difficult situations. So I was wondering if you could add that as well, support for paras and funding for paras.
We could certainly fit that in. We know that's an issue. We know that part of it is post-secondary education. Is it available? Can paras be trained? And then when they get here, what is their pay scale? And And part of that is, yeah, it's a big part of the entire process.
Right.
So we haven't specifically addressed it here, but we have talked to our legislators about that previously, and we will continue to talk to them.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much.
We
I
could
appreciate
include language where we talk about restrictive teacher licensing procedures to include just even simple language to say restrictive teacher and para licensing or.
Yes, yeah, that's where it would tuck in there, absolutely.
Just prompts a conversation we can have with them.
We try not to ask for categorical funding.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Because that sometimes ties our hands
Right.
as a school district.
Yeah, that makes
But,
sense.
you know, hopefully, you know, if we get a 5% increase on the
That would be
formula,
amazing. Yeah. I
that
hope
would
so.
allow us to do
Sorry.
a lot in terms of funding for paras and increasing salaries. So one of the problems with the categorical funding is that you end up with all these isolated pots of money that you
And they're
can't move
earmarked,
back and
right.
forth.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And that became a discussion topic at our, at the Minnesota School Boards Association legislative
Delegate Assembly.
delegate assembly, thank you. People were concerned that we've got too many categories now, and it's not easy to shift money back and forth.
Right.
So, but I do understand, and I think we all understand your concern about paras and their, you know, the pay scales.
Thank you.
Is there anything we missed?
Did you want to mention the breakfast upcoming?
I
that we're
will
hosting?
do that, yeah.
Okay.
As soon as
I
we get
think,
this approved.
I see.
It's important from my work in the LAC just to make sure that we as school board members review the current platform so that when we are speaking with our community and or are running into our state legislators at the local coffee shop, that we can reinforce what the district's priorities are. And I appreciate the work that all of you do so much. This is a collective effort with cabinet, the district, and all of us here at the board table. And so I think it looks like something that we're all feeling comfortable with at this point. So are we looking for approval of this? We are looking for approval of this at the board table tonight, and
Even though I'm on the testifier side, I'll make the motion.
okay, wonderful.
I move that the board approve the 2023 Hopkins Legislative Action Coalition platform.
Second?
I have a motion and a second. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? And the board has adopted the LAC's state legislative platform for 2023. Thank you all for being here tonight to present it.
I would just like to add a reminder to everyone that, well, to the board, that our Association of Metropolitan School Districts legislative kickoff is January 6th at 8 o'clock in the morning at, in Little Canada. So you're all invited. Many of our legislators will be there. I know Representative Joachim is already committed. I'm not sure if anybody else has at this point. Then the LAC is having their legislative breakfast on January 20th, and everyone is also invited to that. That will be
West Junior High.
Thank you. At West Junior High. And then March 8th, AMSD is having their day at the Capitol. So if anyone wants to get on the bus and come over with us, we'd be glad to have you there. So, thank you.
And once it's complete, the platform goes on our website, so it's available to our community to review as well.
All right, very good.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now moving on, our next item on new business is policies in first read. So I would like to invite Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot back up to the table to talk about our two policies, 857, food and beverage, and policy 858, concessions. These policies reflect changes to ensure alignment with the District Vision 2031, our new equity lens, and I invite all of our board members to remember the reflective questions that are a part of that as we enter into discussion of policies. And we discussed these policies, and I want to send a specific thank you to Oscar Wolf, our board representative on the monitoring committee, who has done an amazing job of collecting student voice and feedback on our policies this year, and in particular in this one, it really does help to hear directly from our students. So thank you so much for school nutrition. So with that, Assistant Superintendent Lightfoot, if you could walk us through these policies and the changes.
Thank you. I am happy to do so. We have been working with our school nutrition department, specifically on two policies that you see in front of you, one to follow after, which will be our wellness policy. But as in preparation for that work, we have been doing specific work with the two policies that were presented to you in your packet of information. The first that we'll walk through is 857. 857 has specific information that the monitoring committee and our school nutrition department is recommending. In part, one of the pieces that we want to make sure that we do provide additional guidance on is the necessity that is outlined in 857 and 858 as well, about making sure that when individuals have food and beverage available, that they know that as a governmental agency, we are under the expectations and regulations of the Minnesota Department of Health, their licensing and permit guidelines. And so we wanted to make sure that there was specific language that reminded individuals that they do need to check in with the school nutrition department to make sure that they are being compliant with those regulations and expectations. In addition, on 857, we also had the conversation and were intentionally mindful about the addition of Section 5, which is culturally representative choices, that when we do have food and beverage options available, that those menus and options include food and beverage items that are culturally representative of the populations we serve. So we wanted to be intentional about that in that guidance and in that construction of menus and options. So that is 857. If there are any questions or other comments about that, I would be happy to entertain them at this time.
Thank you. Andreessen?
Yes, Director Hartland.
I'm sorry, were you saying something that I interrupted?
No, I was just going to ask and see if anyone had any questions.
Certainly. My question is specifically for the addition of Section 5, which I love because as a vegetarian, hot dogs are not something that I find terribly accessible. What does this actually, what action does this compel? So, do parent coordinators of sporting events, are they going to get updated wording? Are we going to revisit some vendor relationships? What's the practical impact of adding this to the policy?
Sure. Multiple. I would say that in different sets of circumstances, it really presents us with a host of opportunities to expand menu options, to expand choices as we've had those conversations, and to be intentionally seeking those. Remember, this one is for the internal use, and so for most of our work with the internal use that we have when we have symbolic or other kinds of use of food for celebratory gatherings, I think Dr. Mary Peary-Reed showed you that the recognition that we did with our maintenance and custodial staff, we were intentional about making sure that we had different options available and sought out different local vendors to assist with that, as well as our internal options that we are developing. So I think those kinds of gatherings definitely available, and as well, creating options and opportunities, not only through the school menus, but making sure that those items that are available even on school menus also have options for additional food, beverage, and potentially even concession options as well.
Thank you.
Any other comments or questions? I think we can move on to policy 858.
All right, 858. Part of what we have noticed in the past couple years has been the inclusion of food trucks. And 858 is specific with that simply because there are quite a few regulations, even as a governmental agency, that we need to be mindful of. And as that appeal has grown, we needed to make sure that people were aware of that specific set of information. So you see that added in particular here. And making sure that according to our USDA guidelines as a recipient of funds, that we were specific about the inclusion of specific information related through the not only food truck information, but that we also had and reinforced the communication of this set of information to staff, because often unbeknownst to staff, thinking they're doing a great, kind of community builder, good opportunity, and that, well, wait a minute, there are all these, there really are a lot of regulations. And so we have to make sure that we're compliant with those as well. So we wanted to make sure that there was a communication aspect of this as well. So that was really the majority of work that came through with 858. Is there any additional question or other information I can provide related to this?
Chair Andreessen.
Yes, Treasurer Adams.
Just to be clear, Nick, Section E talks about group requests for food trucks. That MDH needs to have a 10-day advance notice, and further that Hopkins School Nutrition needs an additional 10 days for notice. So it sounds to me like if anyone's thinking of having a food truck at an event, they need to plan at least 20 days in advance. Is that correct? Okay. I know some of these parent groups don't think that far in advance often, so I just want to make it clear to them that, if you're thinking about doing that, this is what you have to plan on.
Well, and often when, when PTO organizations or other organizations that are thinking of developing events, I think that in part, any way that we can get this information out there more fully to them more quickly is exactly to your point. And that's why we wanted to make sure we had the communication element here, so that all staff, whether they be administrative or classroom or custodial or just in general, people know this is what we have to do in order to have these. We want to encourage them. We want to make sure that they're part of it. We just have to make sure that we're mindful of the requirements that we have to make those happen.
Right. All right, good.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I move that the board approve the above policies in first read, and further that the board directs the administration to prepare the policies with suggested revisions for approval in second reading at the next meeting as part of the consent.
Second.
Thank you. I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? The policies in first read pass. And we can move on to our board member reports.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Nick? I've got a brief one I'd be glad to share.
Great.
On December 8th, which was what, was that a Wednesday, Thursday? I attended a fundraiser for Gatewood at the Bear Cave Brewing. I had never been there before in downtown Hopkins. I didn't see anyone I knew. So I was wondering if I was at the right place at the time, but they did accept donations, and a percentage of the bill was donated to Gatewood. So hopefully Gatewood got my contribution. On December 12th, I attended, I think that was a week ago Monday, I attended a community gathering on disrupting the school-to-prison pipeline at St. Joan of Arc Church in South Minneapolis. And it was led by Bridgeworks, a Twin Cities nonprofit created and led by youth with justice system experience. And I had heard these same people present at the regional AMSD meeting, I think in November it was. And so I had heard all this stuff before, but the thing that, what they advocate for is for student-centered micro schools. And they held up as examples the School for Recording Arts in St. Paul, near Lexington and University, and the Avalon Charter School, which I believe is near Hamlin University over in St. Paul. And they were very passionate about it. There's several former and current students that swear to how these particular schools, turned them around and saved their lives. I didn't get a chance to ask the question, but I was a little surprised when I checked the MDE website that said both of these schools have been identified for future support, additional support. And then I looked at their test scores, which I take with a grain of salt. They were not anywhere near what ours are. But the thing that concerned me was that the graduation rates were so low. They were 30% for one school and 64% for another school. And my question would have been, if I had been able to ask it, if these are so attractive to students, why don't they stick with it? It was concerning to me that their graduation rates are so low, and yet they are very sincere about holding this up as an example for other school districts to follow. So I think it merits some additional discussion with Bridgeworks. And then on December 14th, I attended the final Leading for the Future presentation and discussion with KnowledgeWorks. KnowledgeWorks is a organization, a nonprofit that's dedicated to improving education for students across the nation. And they developed 2 cohorts here in the Twin Cities, or actually in the state, that met the first 6 months of last year and the last 6 months of this year. And it's always an interesting and in-depth discussion that we have with each other. So when we had our final one, there will be a reunion of sorts for both cohorts at the Minnesota School Boards Association Conference in January. So I'm looking forward to that. And that's all I have to report.
Thank you, Treasurer Adams. Are there any other board reports this evening?
I have a brief one as well.
Great, Director Hartland.
The LAC has been doing a lot of work to prepare for the breakfast that Treasurer Adams mentioned earlier. That meeting, or that breakfast is, I don't know if we said the date earlier, but it's January 20th, and that's where we are hosting all of our legislators, and we have so far perfect acceptance. Let's see if they all actually show up, but they are all, so far, on paper anyway, committed to attending, which is pretty great. And in the past couple of years, it's been hybrid or remote, and so seeing people excited to come back into the schools is exciting. And so we'll continue on that. And then another thing that I have done since I was last at the meeting was attend some more robotics team competitions. And I had mentioned the last time it being the high school's competition, but what it really was kind of an expo. And our local coach, Jason Herzog, had taken it upon himself in conjunction with like 7 other fairly local school districts to set up this exposition to help students who are newer to the team, who didn't have the full robotics experience in the past couple of years due to COVID, have a chance to really see what it's about. So they devised their own game and held this exposition, which is a very complicated thing to put together. And so they are just about to actually kick off their true season, and they will have a whole schedule of meets that they attend. And in keeping with our earlier conversation about just how much it costs to run an organization, the budget for the robotics team, and this is mostly the high school, they do a little bit of cost sharing with other robotics cohorts in our district, but it's $20,000 to $30,000 alone. And they primarily seek that. I think they do some from the HEF, but they all primarily rely on external funding for that. And they do have a coach. And I am unclear at this moment, I don't want to misspeak, but I'm unclear if the coach's budget is inside that $20,000 to $30,000. And so it does kind of give further credence to that thought that we have a lot of organizations that are contributing greatly to our children's experience and to even successful life post-high school that are in this strange loophole. And so I know that the robotics team in particular is working on, one of their kind of projects and goals is to work on kind of an ask, almost like a pitch, because they will use that to seek outside funding. And so it's a topic that I certainly am more interested about, but your organization, Oscar, is not alone in it. And I don't know, I think that's all.
Great, thank you so much. It's nice to hear more about the robotics team. I know they've been growing by leaps and bounds in the last few years.
They have.
Anyone else?
I had a nice meeting that I was able to attend, which is the Schools and Community in Partnership along with Hopkins Community Ed Committee, or is it? I don't know where Alex is, you can correct me. But yeah, I attended that and Holly Magdans was leading it along with Fonda Contreras. It was a wonderful, smaller, more intimate meeting. And I appreciated to see Grace Riley, one of our school board reps, also in attendance. And I was very excited that Skip is partnering with students for more of a youth voice. And they wanted to move forward to support students. What would they were going to discuss the next steps for them to partner with moving forward, and how do they partner with students. So it was amazing that they came up with networking and connecting, being more proactive with students to expose and connect high school students, especially those lacking network connections. They were going to expose students to more avenues for career paths and diversify that. They also discussed peer support for students, because it really does help, especially during COVID. It really helped during COVID times, so they want to do that currently. They wanted to have more of a family-centered approach as well. And also, mental health was brought up and how important it is to continue to support our students who are struggling with issues with mental health. So it was a great meeting, highly informative, and yeah, it was good to connect with them. Another meeting that I attended was the Mentorship of Color meeting, and they too were focusing on supporting our BIPOC population of staff at our schools. So those were the 2 meetings I attended. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Khan. Anyone else? If there are no other board member reports, I want to move us on to our final public comment section of the board meeting. We have a number of our community that have submitted comment cards for items not on the agenda. I don't know if they are present right now. So we will get started on that. I'm going to read out our policies on public comment as a school board. The Hopkins School Board believes that hearing from our community members is crucial for implementing Vision 2031. If you wish to contact the board via email instead of publicly commenting at a meeting, please use schoolboard@hopkinsschools.org. On the school board page of the district website, you can find a contact the board form to email the entire board or individual board members' emails, addresses, and telephone numbers. We welcome always a conversation with you. At board meetings, public comment will be received both in person and through voicemail. We have not received any voicemails for items not on the agenda. Is that correct, Elise? Thank you. Instructions for how to leave a voicemail to be played at the board meeting can be found in the board packet on our district website. We have 2 public comment sessions, which we are doing our second this evening. Each public comment section lasts for 30 minutes, and we allow comments up to 3 minutes for each person. As outlined in the board meeting protocols on the board website, if we have more community members than 10 per comment section, the first 5 voicemails received will be played, and the first 5 people who submitted public comment cards will be invited to the table. We have 9 comment cards tonight, so everybody will have an opportunity to speak. However, there are guidelines for public comment. Please keep your comments to 3 minutes or less. We will have a timer displayed that will tell you where you are at in your time. Public comment is for input only. Members of the school board will not respond directly to public comments that are made at this meeting. No specific action will be taken at this meeting in response to comments that are made or issues that are raised during the public comment period related to items not on the agenda. If the board determines that action is appropriate, the action will occur at a future board meeting. If you have left your contact information on your comment card, a district representative may follow up with you after the meeting. I will recognize 1 speaker at a time. Only those speakers who are recognized will be permitted to speak. Individuals who interfere with or interrupt speakers, the board, or the proceedings may be asked to leave. Personal attacks on any individual, including any other speaker during the public comment session, are unacceptable, as are obscenities or profanity. Persistence in making such comments will end the individual's opportunity to address the board and may result in the individual being directed to leave. I will rule out of order any statement that would violate state or federal law, school board policy, or the privacy rights of an individual. Minnesota's open meeting law prohibits the discussion of private educational data during an open meeting. Accordingly, during the public comment session, no person may discuss private educational data on an identifiable student. The open meeting law also requires the board to close a meeting for preliminary consideration of allegations against an employee. Accordingly, community members who have concerns about an employee or want to file a complaint or allegations against an employee are encouraged to contact the superintendent. We ask you not to name any employee by name during your comments. Repeated violations of these time, place, and manner restrictions may also lead to the meeting being briefly recessed. Community members will have an opportunity to be heard within the limits of the law and subject to the time, place, and manner restrictions above. Thank you, sincerely, after all those restrictions, for participating in public comment this evening. I would like to welcome our first person who submitted a public comment card, Maida Ahmed, to the table. You can have a seat, and once you start speaking, the timer will begin. Thank you for being here.
Hello, my name is Maida Ahmed, and I'm a junior at Hopkins High School. If you don't recognize me, this is sadly my second time in coming up here speaking on the injustices my peers and I have faced at Hopkins High School. When the previous para monitored our prayer room, he was assigned to both the girls and the boys' prayer rooms. At that time, he was the only person assigned to monitor both rooms. Since that incident occurred, we have talked about our discomfort with male staff watching our prayer because of the harassment we had experienced. After a while, the school offered 2 staff members of both genders to monitor the rooms. We expected the girl staff member to watch the girls and the boy staff member to watch the boys, since we previously made it very clear to administrators that it was what we were comfortable with. Unfortunately, the school decided to have it the other way around. It was such a small and easy decision for them to make. Given the choice to simply listen to us and fulfill our needs, the school chose not to. Why? Was that out of anger, seeing us stand up for ourselves? Was that out of pettiness to show their power, or was it simply out of hate for the Muslim students at our school that they have expressed for years with their actions? Such a small decision has had no impact on the administration, but has shown me that Hopkins does not care about me or their Muslim students. I've been in the Hopkins district since preschool, so has my older sisters, cousins, and friends. The thought of my younger siblings and cousins eventually reaching Hopkins High School and graduating here used to be a comforting feeling. It used to be a comforting environment. I can't even remember the last time I believed it was. This school is not a school I would feel comfortable bringing my siblings into, and I know I'm not the only one. Being at this school has shown me that its environment is only welcoming if you're white, and the administration is to blame for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to invite Mariama Ahmed to the table. Thank you for being here. The timer will start once you begin speaking.
Hello, my name is Mariama Ahmed, and I'm a senior at Hopkins High School. I've spoken about this issue once before, but nothing's changed, so I'm here again. One of my friends didn't feel comfortable speaking about this experience, so I'm here speaking on her behalf. She felt that her words wouldn't be taken seriously, and she didn't feel comfortable coming up here. A male administrator at Hopkins High School harassed her. We were all walking to the prayer room on one pass, and he stopped only her in the hallway and told her that she needed a pass to be able to pray. When she explained why she didn't have a pass, he said he didn't care and that she couldn't pray without one. Then he followed her to the prayer room and stood in front of the door, stopping her from praying. He told her that she couldn't pray in the girls' prayer room, so she told him that she would pray in the front office. She would pray in the front office, and he said he didn't mind where she prayed as long as she didn't pray in the girls' prayer room. He made it clear that he didn't care about actually following the rules. He just wanted to be petty and pick on a Muslim girl to prove a point. After this, he emailed our teacher and her mother to inform them of her actions. When we told another administrator about it, she was very dismissive, and the first administrator still hasn't apologized to her. A week later, a chemistry teacher harassed my friends, who were both Muslim girls, in front of his whole class, and nothing was done about it. I'm one of the leaders of the Muslim Student Association at Hopkins High School, and it's disheartening to hear what the younger students had experienced only being at this school for a year. I'm tired of being a bystander to all the harassment Muslim students face at his school, and it's disappointing to see that we have no support from our school's administration. It makes me wonder if this is what Hopkins stands for, because it happens so frequently. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to invite Miriam Abdullahi to the table. I apologize. Please correct my pronunciation of your name.
I'm sorry?
Please feel free to correct the pronunciation of your name as someone who often has their last name mispronounced.
Thank you.
The timer will start when you begin speaking. Thanks.
Hello, my name is Miriam Abdullahi, and I'm a second-year language arts teacher at Hopkins High School. My connection to Hopkins Public School goes back further than the recent years of my employment. I am a product of the Hopkins Public School system and attended both Eisenhower and West Junior High. Both of my parents have been employed by the district. This place is very special to me. Sadly, my experience as a student contrasts greatly from my experience as a teacher, which has left me with a great deal of heartache and anguish. The incident that really broke me was the handling of student suspensions. There is no clear policy of how suspensions are to be handled at Hopkins High School. When administrators are asked about the policy, they do not give a clear answer or resource. It is unethical for students to be sent home and left without access to education. This is a right for all students. Not only are students sent home, but families have not and do not get communication about what caused the suspension, how long the suspension will be, how to get their student learning during the suspension period, or a clear reentry plan. I will highlight two specific experiences. One instance of a strange suspension occurred recently. The scholar involved in the fight initially contacted administration. Once the fight occurred, the scholar did not receive clear communication of next steps. Not all the families involved were contacted or met with. In fact, one of the scholars was in my class. I received an email about the suspension on 12/14 that stated the student would be out of class 12/12 to 12/14. This email was received the last day of the suspension, and interestingly enough, the student was coming to class during that time. The student had no idea that they were suspended, and when I contacted mom to find out if she was contacted, she shared that she was not. Many students are pushed out of school this way. The students and the families feel wronged but do not fully understand how to operate in the system. Another instance of a suspension that I'd like to share is referring to an incident that occurred November 30. Students were sent home after the incident and many of the families were never contacted. I was involved in a meeting with one of the families. This particular family emailed and contacted the school to figure out what was going on. Eventually, the family decided to come to school in person after the student has been out of school for over a week. After several in-person meetings, the scholar was finally able to re-enter the school Monday, December 12th. This is a terrible injustice, and so many days of learning were lost. No alternative education was offered to the student, and no clear restorative plan was made. I became a support system for the families and students that reached out to me. This caused me to be involved in conversation with the families, administrators, and teachers in hopes to help students re-enter the school environment or stay. I felt it was a part of my role as an educator in this district and a community member. Sadly, I received pushback. I will end with this. Students, whether or not they are suspended, have a right to education. Families have a right to be informed. What is happening is a moral injustice and something needs to change. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to invite Amir Esak to the table. Thank you for being here tonight. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Hello, my name is Amir Isak. I'm a junior at Hopkins High School, and I'm here to talk about my personal experience with the racism that has been going around the school. In November of this year, me and my friends were targeted by a group of white boys. They picked on us for no reason, asking us what we would do if they was to spit on us. After that, they kept threatening to fight us, even though we literally didn't do anything to them. We tried going to the school, and they barely did anything about it. The next day, I was in the bathroom by myself, and 3 of them came in, and one of them pulled out a taser on me and told me that when they would fight us, they're not gonna be using their hand, they'll be using one of these. I told one of my teachers, and she made me tell the administrator about it, even though I didn't believe anything would happen. They tried to make me sign a no-contact agreement and rush us into a circle, but when I asked about the point of the circle, they never brought it to me or even brought it up what happened again. I tried to follow up with multiple admin about this, and nothing ended up happening. How am I supposed to feel safe at Hopkins or be supported in the school when things like this happen, especially when every time I mess up, they treat me like the worst person ever, but when I need support, it's not that deep to them.
Thank you.
I would like to invite Murad Essek to the table. Hi, welcome.
Hi, it's Murad, by the way.
Sorry.
That's okay.
The timer will start when you begin speaking. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Murad Essek. I've been going to the Hopkins district since 3rd grade. I'm a senior student council member and president of BSA, Black Student Alliance. You might recognize my face from the sit-in that I led at Hopkins High School in September when administrators tried to suspend me after one of the staff members wanted to assault me while I was in an orthopedic boot. Even though the school conducted a whole investigation after this incident, where my life and my safety was threatened, I never received closure, nor did I understand the situation and where it ended. Since the experience, my relationship with administration changed. The principal and associate principal and I used to be close until I started to disagree with some of the actions that they took. They used me when it was beneficial to them, like when I was breaking up fights or calming things down in the prayer room, but then they would block me out when I wouldn't agree with their actions. The amount of times the new associate principal alone has stopped Muslim students from going to the prayer room to pray and argue with Muslim students about knowing things about the religion by Googling it is very Islamophobic and damaging. Because of the action that administration is taking, I feel like teachers are seeing this and then are being very Islamophobic too. For example, in the last 2 weeks, multiple teachers have felt comfortable targeting my younger cousin, who is a Muslim girl, while in her class. They kept making comments in front of the whole class that are very Islamophobic and caused her to leave class very upset. As her older cousin and as a leader in this building, I feel like it's my job to protect her and to make sure this doesn't keep happening to other students. But it's really tiring to have to spend so much energy in controlling my own anger. I am a senior in high school. This is already the most stressful year of my education. I'm supposed to be focusing on where I'm supposed to be going to college, but the things that keep happening in the school make it impossible to do that. I wish I could just focus on graduating and having fun like everyone else in my grade, but I can't. But I feel like I have to make the school better so that my younger brother and cousins don't have to keep dealing with this next year. I hope you all don't ignore this issue and you guys take this very seriously, like our admin hasn't, and try to do something for it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I would like to invite Fatuma Ali to the table. Thank you for being here. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Good evening. My name is Fatuma Ali. I'm a Black, Muslim, and Somali educator at Hopkins High School. I state these identities because it is my experiences living and working at the intersection of all three that drove me to this seat today. My time in this district started 6 years ago with the paid student teaching position at North Junior High in an effort to help diversify the teaching staff in this district. Since then, I've been blessed to witness the increase of educators, staff, and administrators of color throughout the district. Despite this, with the exception of my first year, every single year that I have been in this district, issues of Islamophobia and xenophobia that I have both witnessed and fallen victim to have continued to plague us, and still nothing could have prepared me for this year. The past 5 years, I've kept my head down, helped my students advocate for themselves, and focused on becoming tenured. Then I became tenured and realized my biggest fear. I'd become so comfortable burying my head and leaving my students defend for themselves that I'd become the kind of educator I swore I would never be. The kind who let my identities get me through the door but was unwilling to stick her neck out when I witnessed injustices being perpetrated against members of my own community. To be clear, when I say my community, I mean my community of Black, Muslim, and African people, especially students. I emphasize this because lately there is this notion that it is inherently anti-Black to speak against any Black person, regardless of their position, actions, or the impact of those actions on most especially other Black people, including Black students and staff members like myself. In fact, the opposite is actually true. It is not only anti-Black to use identity politics as a shield from accountability, but to also use one shared identity to ignore and malign the issues of those of us who are not only Black, but also Muslim and immigrants. Since September, I've witnessed an escalation in Islamophobic and xenophobic rhetoric and actions that I wouldn't have fathomed when I first got here. Several weeks ago, a fight that began with threats against Somali students on social media broke out between half a dozen students. And while I personally alerted several administrators over 4 hours in advance and continued to follow up with my fears of escalation, not one administrator spoke to a single Somali student beforehand. Instead, I spent my day trying to alleviate the increasing fear and anxiety of students, and finally ended with me on the floor, trying to physically break up a fight that could have been avoided had even one administrator backed me up. In the weeks after, admin and other staff of color tried to frame the fight as a Somali versus Black issue, repeatedly saying things like "these Somalis" and asking the Somali students whether they were in a gang or a mob because they were acting like it. Then they attempted to throw the book at our Somali students only, denying them and their families any transparency and most of their due process rights. I would love nothing more than to be able to be in my classroom teaching my students. But in the last 2.5 years, this school and its admin have yoked me around, at turns treating me like a show pony for photo opportunities or an exemplar for creating popular courses, leaning on my relationships with students to gain insight and do their bidding, and then shutting me out and disparaging me to my colleagues when I was in any way critical of their treatment of or lent support to our most vulnerable students. I won't continue to bite my tongue when every single week since September I've had to console a different Muslim student because of the Islamophobic and xenophobic treatment they are repeatedly facing at the hands of staff members who I can only assume feel emboldened because of the rhetoric of our superiors. I won't continue to lock myself in a bathroom so that I can cry without my students seeing me, only to go home and cry myself to sleep night after night, filled with a mixture of rage, hurt, and helplessness. If this district is truly about equity and restorative practices, then drastic measures need to be taken. I hope for all of our sakes that we don't wait for things to get much worse before doing so.
Time is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. I can't quite make out the first name here, but I'm going to make an attempt. I would like to invite Pinar Kumar. To the table. Thank you for coming up here. Welcome. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
All right. Just have to collect myself quickly.
Yeah, that's fine. Take your time.
Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Abhinav Kumar, a Hindu Indian student body president at Hopkins High School alongside student board rep Oscar. Since I last spoke at the school board meeting on October 25th, there has been a lot of change at Hopkins, very little of which has been positive or beneficial to the Muslim and East African student population at our school. Much of this is rooted in the idea that, as people whose parents are immigrants that came to this country with little to no knowledge of what was to come, who took a risk to give us and our kids a better life and don't want to jeopardize that opportunity, that we would not dare stand up for ourselves or speak out against existing power structures in our society that we are continually subjected to. Yet here I am once again. At this point, you are not only well aware of the experiences, but also the perspectives of many affected parties at our school. Personally, I was an intern at Thrive Ed and a part of the Reimagining School Safety Club from 2020 to 2021, and I've worked extensively in not only understanding but also recognizing where restorative practices can be implemented and improved. I've come to the conclusion that at Hopkins High School, there is no such thing as restorative justice or proper implementation of any restorative practice. This not only reflects poorly on our school, but it reflects poorly on our district, who is very clearly committed to implementing these practices fairly. At HHS, restorative practices are used as nothing more than a cop-out rather than the powerful tools they can be to our scholars. Restorative practices explicitly call for cutting down on the amount of reliance on expulsion and suspension, also known as punitive or authoritative punishment. This is partly because such punishments mostly negatively affect communities of color, as punitive punishments can significantly affect financial and social outcomes of those already susceptible to other oppressive structures in our society today. Yet many students at our school, especially students of color and Muslim students, are repeatedly subjected to different forms of suspension or threats of expulsion. Our quote-unquote restorative practices are also rarely properly implemented, and our school tries to label things as restorative in an effort to meet a criteria more than actually making positive change amongst the communities at our school. So what message does this send about restorative practices and restorative justice as a whole? To students and staff, it makes them look useless. Because they are not implemented or executed properly, they seem ineffective when in reality restorative practices are statistically and anecdotally better for vulnerable student populations. This all boils down to the opening point I made, which is that the punitive measures that specific communities at our school are subjected to are set in the idea that nobody will speak up for those affected, whether it be out of fear, disbelief, or simply because they don't care for the struggles of a group written off and looked down upon by the Western world. But as you've seen here today, we don't plan on staying silent any longer. And to those parents and to those people that are here today, those that are present on the live stream, and the many, many people that will be seeing this clip after, we all sincerely hope that you will not stay silent either. Thank you so much for your time tonight. Have a great rest of your night.
Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to invite Emily Ward up to the table. Welcome. Thank you for being here tonight. The timer will start when you begin speaking.
Good evening, and thank you so much for all that you do and for the opportunity to speak. Our family's been part of the Hopkins School District for over 12 years. Currently, I'm also a member of the district's Caregivers of Gender Expansive Kids group. One topic that has been a recurrent focus for that group all year is all gender bathrooms. My particular focus and discussion relates to the high school, but this is an issue that could be improved upon at all Hopkins schools to varying extents. Reading through the Hopkins School's gender inclusion policy shows that Hopkins schools are talking the talk, but the next step is to walk the walk. The bathroom situation needs to be improved, not just next year when 9th grade shifts up to the high school, but today for current students. Parents in our group approached the principal, assistant superintendent, and superintendent prior to the start of the school year, and even as early as last spring. Now it's 4 months into the school year, and quantity, location, and consistent access to all gender restrooms continues to be an ongoing issue. Our group was able to meet in person with Principal Ballard and 3 of the assistant principals last week. She seemed supportive and receptive, if somewhat unaware of the considerations, but it's too early to tell if that will translate into action. It's been less than a week. I look forward to finding out. In the spirit of walking the walk, here are a few courses of actions I would like to recommend. First, students need adequate access to all gender restrooms, not just in the future after any grade level shifting, but today. It's humane and entirely reasonable that students have safe bathrooms to use at school today. Second, communication. The existence and location of all gender bathrooms needs to be integrated into other standard beginning of the school year communications. Transgender students should not start out the school year wondering if there will be a bathroom for them to use safely and where such a bathroom might be. Also, under that category of communication is communication to staff, and this includes chaperones at dances, chaperones during lunch periods, and any and all staff who have a key that lets them physically restrict existing all-gender bathroom access due to unrelated behavior problems. Third, education and representation. The gender inclusion policy talks about providing training and supportive materials for students and staff. The principal was unaware of some of the considerations and seemed to understand better after talking with our group. Education and representation in communication, construction, and other decision-making are key to bringing about more equitable problem-solving going forward. Before I end, I would like to mention that there are a variety of toolkits, checklists, best practices specific to school environments available and easily located online. The Minnesota Department of Education has one, but there are others as well. There are also great examples of all-gender restroom approaches in the Twin Cities, St. Paul Public Schools, the C School in Robbinsdale School District, and others. Our caregiver group meets regularly, and any school board member would be most welcome if they wish to discuss further. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate everyone coming out this evening. I know it is can feel intimidating to come before the board and to speak in a public forum. So I really appreciate you coming and being part of our process and part of the board. So with that, that ends our public comment.
One more person in the public commentary.
Oh. I got 8 cards. So for 9 total.
Did you say 9 total?
Yeah, that's, so
I think one of the 8 did not get called.
can you tell me your name? Oh, yeah, I must have skipped it. I am so sorry. Do you mind? It's out of order. I'm so sorry.
Sorry about that.
I'll just say first time doing this.
My first time too.
Thank you. Welcome to the table. I will set up a timer since our on-screen one has disappeared.
Oh, it's back.
Oh, it's back, yay! And it's counting down. I'll start.
Okay. Hello, my name is Ayub Mohammed, and I'm reading a statement on behalf of Salman Hassan, who couldn't be here today. I'm a junior at Hopkins High School. A couple of weeks ago, a fight involving a group of boys at our school broke out. During that fight, even though I wasn't involved and even walked away before the fight ended, the school called my parents and told them that I need to stay home. The principals kept me out of class for more than 2 weeks from December 1st to December 12th. On December 9th, the school decided to hold a meeting with me, my parents, and some other boys who were also being suspended from that fight. The principal at our school tried to convince my parents that I was fighting when my mom made them look at the cameras and they saw that I wasn't. They tried to claim that I was actually suspended for hyping up the fight. That's another lie because one of the videos that student filmed clearly shows that I never said anything. The school jumped to the conclusion that I was fighting just because I was a Somali boy and I was near the fight and some of my friends were involved. The administration continues to lie about facts of the fight. My parents never got a suspension letter and they never emailed my teachers to explain why I was not in class. Now I have to make up almost 2 weeks of assignments and my teachers believe that I was just skipping class for no reason. The school also tries to cover up their mistakes by editing Infinite Campus to say some of my absences were excused while the other half were completely erased. I don't understand why the administration can get away with this. It makes it hard for students to trust them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, sure. Thank you for reminding me that, alerting me that I had skipped a card. I appreciate that, and also for your patience with my not knowing how to run a board meeting. So with that, public comment is closed. I again thank all of you for coming and being part of our meeting and addressing the board. And Dr. Mary Perry-Reed, you have an announcement?
Before we close, I also want to thank all of our audience members, in particular our students. We do have board protocols which don't allow us to comment specifically for every message shared, but broadly I would like to thank you for your candid perspectives and your bravery in showing up in this space, for some of you a second time today. And I want to acknowledge that as we grapple with these with your experiences and these issues together, I want to acknowledge that you're doing real work, and this is part of your preparation for college and for career as you enter into cross-cultural spaces and advocate for yourself and advocate for others. And as adults in our system, we do look forward to partnering with you. We know that these situations are not easy to solve, but I encourage all of us to lean into the difficulty and to figure out a way to move forward. So thank you for being here and for sharing. And on a completely unrelated note, it would be strange if you all received a message in your email and we're not privy to it as you're here. So I will share that due to an unforeseen bus driver shortage for tomorrow, which does put our students in jeopardy. If we cannot guarantee that all students can be picked up safely and on time at their bus routes, We are forced to cancel school tomorrow, and our Director of Communications and really our entire team has been working on that while we are, trying to be present for the board meeting. So you will be receiving an email in your inbox soon, and we will text and voice message your parents and caregivers. So that is the announcement, and we apologize. We do enjoy seeing our students on the last day before winter break.
Did you see the disappointment like wave across the room?
I saw.
I mean,
I
there
saw
were
like
so
a little
many
bit of
sad
this.
faces.
Palpable, palpable.
Good job not cheering, I guess.
Yeah, I have to say, I don't think my 9th grader at home is going to be
Yeah.
displeased with the news. Yes.
So thank you all for being here this evening, and have a wonderful night.
Well, I would.
Sorry. I'm not the chair.
Thank you. No, we just have to officially adjourn.
I move adjournment.
Yes.
Second. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? This meeting is adjourned at 8:56 p.m. Thank you all for being here.
Sorry for the hijack.